Yo, what's up everyone? It's Eclipse Wizardry, and today we're checking out, what if Daphne, Hermione and Luna all kissed Harry age 9 and try which ancient magic created unbreakable soul bond. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1. The day it began, the park smelled like wet grass and old rust, the kind of afternoon that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain properly or just threatened to. The sky was the color of a bruise, purple-gray over the rooftops of Little Whinging, and the swings moved by themselves in a wind that wasn't quite strong enough to justify it. Harry Potter sat on the roundabout, not spinning it. Just sitting. His trainers were too big, his jeans were too long, and the oversized gray sweatshirt he was wearing had the words Dudley's GYM printed on the front in letters that had mostly cracked and peeled away. He was 9 years old and he had a split lip from yesterday, and he was currently trying to figure out if the pigeons near the bin were organizing themselves, because they kept moving in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. Watching things was something Harry was good at. It cost nothing and it got you in trouble less often than talking did. He'd been at the park since 8 in the morning because the Dursleys had a garden party today. Aunt Petunia had said it with a tone that made it clear his presence would be tolerated approximately as warmly as a wasp in the potato salad, and he'd been handed a pound coin and told not to come back before 4. It was currently 10:30. The pound coin was in his pocket and he had no intention of spending it on anything because he'd learned a long time ago that having something, even something small, was better than having nothing. The pigeons scattered. A girl sat down on the roundabout across from him. She had blonde hair that fell in loose waves, and she was wearing a yellow dress with what appeared to be small hand-painted moons along the hem. She was carrying a magazine, but she was holding it upside down, and she was reading it that way with total concentration, her pale eyes moving steadily across the page. She didn't look at him. She sat cross-legged and turned a page. Harry watched her for a moment. "You know that's upside down," he said, because watching things sometimes led to saying things despite his better judgment. "I know," the girl said, without looking up. "I find the articles more truthful this way. The letters rearrange themselves when they're frightened and you can see what they really mean." Harry considered this. It was, objectively, the strangest thing anyone had ever said to him, and that included the time his teacher Mrs. Figg had told him that her cat Mr. Tibbles could read emotional signatures. "Does it work?" "Sometimes." She turned another page. "You have a rackspurt." "A what?" "Invisible creature. Floats into your ear and makes your thoughts go fuzzy." She looked up at him then, and her eyes were a very pale gray-blue, like shallow water over stones. She seemed to be assessing something just slightly to the left of his face. "You've had it for a while." "Probably years. That's why everything feels slow and heavy." Harry's mouth opened. He closed it. He said, "I'm Harry." "I'm Luna," said the girl. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that had no agenda behind it at all, which was unusual enough that Harry felt something in his chest do a small, startled thing. "You're sad but you're not unhappy. That's different, you know." "Is it? Unhappy people are angry at everything. Sad people just miss something they haven't found yet." Harry looked at his trainers. "Yeah," he said, after a while. "Maybe." The roundabout shifted slightly as Luna stood up, and then she stepped forward, leaned over, and kissed him on the cheek. It was quick and matter-of-fact, the way you might give someone a coin they dropped, returning something that was theirs. She smelled like something floral that Harry couldn't name. He stared at her. "That's for the rackspurt," she said, and sat back down, and opened her upside-down magazine again, apparently finished with the subject. Harry touched his cheek. Something felt strange, not bad strange, not the prickling wrongness he sometimes felt before things happened around him, broken plates and singed curtains and once a teacher's wig catching inexplicable fire. This was different. It was warm. It sat in his cheekbone and worked its way quietly inward, like tea when you were cold. He was still thinking about it when the second girl arrived. She came around the corner of the park's low brick wall at a pace that suggested she had somewhere important to be and had taken a detour she hadn't fully committed to yet. She was dark-haired, very neat, with a green cardigan buttoned precisely and hair that held itself with the kind of discipline that doesn't happen by accident. She stopped at the gate, looked at the park with the calculating assessment of someone selecting a chess position, and then walked to the bench nearest the roundabout and sat down. She placed her bag beside her, took out a book, checked the spine to confirm it was the right one, and began to read. Harry watched her. She had the quality of a person who was very good at not being disturbed, which he recognized because he'd cultivated the same quality himself. After about 3 minutes she looked up and found him looking at her and didn't flinch. She just looked back, cool and direct. "What are you staring at?" she said. "Not aggressive. Just asking." "You," Harry said, because lying seemed like more work. "Observant." She looked back at her book. "What are you reading?" "A History of the Greengrass Estate's Magical Boundary Wards. My mother wrote it." She paused. "It's not for general audiences." "What's a boundary ward?" She lowered the book slightly, and something behind her eyes shifted, the faint adjustment of someone recalculating who they're talking to. "A magical barrier. Like a fence, but it responds to intent rather than physical force. You have to mean harm for it to activate." "Magic's real?" Harry said. She studied him for a moment. "You didn't know?" "No one's told me anything." Something crossed her face then, complicated and quick, like a shadow on fast-moving water. She closed her book. "How can you not know?" "You're clearly..." She stopped. Started again. "What's your name?" "Harry Potter." Her book fell off her lap. She picked it up with the careful movements of someone very deliberately not reacting. She sat up very straight. "You're Harry Potter. You know me? Everyone in the wizarding world knows you. You're..." She stopped again, and this time she seemed to be choosing words with surgical precision. "There was a war. You ended it. When you were a baby. You're famous." Harry turned this over. He looked at Luna, who was still reading her magazine. Luna gave a small, serene nod that suggested this was consistent with her understanding of the universe. Harry looked back at the dark-haired girl. "No one told me," he said again, and his voice came out steadier than he felt. Her jaw tightened. "Your guardians should have." She stopped herself. Breathed through her nose. "I'm Daphne. Daphne Greengrass." She said it like a name that was meant to mean something, and then seemed faintly annoyed that the context for it was missing. "Hi," Harry said. Daphne stood up, collected her bag, and walked to the roundabout. She stopped in front of him and looked at him with an expression that was working very hard to stay neutral and not quite getting there. There was something in it that Harry couldn't read, something that looked almost like sorrow, quickly managed. She leaned forward and kissed his cheek, on the same side as Luna's. It was precise and deliberate, like signing a document you've thought about carefully. She pulled back and looked at him with those ice-gray eyes and said, very quietly, "Someone should have told you a long time ago." Harry had the feeling she wasn't entirely talking about magic. The warmth in his cheekbone doubled. It spread wider now, moved up toward his temple, down toward his jaw, threading through him like something waking up slowly in the dark, not startled, just becoming aware. He put a hand to his face again. "You felt it too," Daphne said. It wasn't a question. "What is it?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't know. But my grandmother wrote about something like it. In theory." She sat down on the roundabout beside him, not close, but deliberately choosing his orbit rather than her separate bench. She opened her book again, but she wasn't reading it. Her eyes were unfocused, turned inward. Luna turned a page of her upside-down magazine. The park was quiet. Then a third girl came through the gate at an almost running pace, brown curly hair pulled into a ponytail that was rapidly losing the battle, arms full of an enormous stack of library books, all of them bookmarked with various scraps of paper at about 17 different points each. She was wearing a sensible blue raincoat that was one size too large, and she had ink on 3 fingers and the resolute expression of someone who intended to read all of those books before the day was through. She stopped when she saw them. She looked at Harry, and she looked at Daphne, and she looked at Luna's upside-down magazine, and she said, to no one in particular, "This isn't what I expected." "What did you expect?" Harry asked. "I was following the pigeons." She seemed to hear herself. She shifted the books in her arms and stood up straighter. "I know that sounds odd. I study magical theory, my parents are dentists, but I read everything, and there's a book, Prendergast's Comparative Symbolism in Ancient Spellcraft, and it says certain wild birds will cluster around sites of pre-activated ancient magic, which doesn't make any sense if you approach it empirically because birds don't have magical receptors, but I wanted to test the hypothesis and..." She stopped. Looked at Harry again. Her expression did something sudden and complicated. "Oh," she said, quietly. "Hermione Granger," said Daphne, not as a greeting, but as a fact being confirmed. Hermione's head turned sharply. "You know me? Your name's in the Witch Weekly Exceptional Muggle-born profile from 2 years ago. You demonstrated accidental arithmetic calculation in a reception class. My mother found it interesting. A beat. I'm Daphne Greengrass. The Luna on the roundabout is Luna Lovegood." Hermione was processing rapidly, you could see it in her eyes, the way information was being filed and cross-referenced in real time. Then she looked at Harry again and said, with the particular tone of someone checking a fact they already know the answer to, "And you're Harry Potter." "People keep saying that like it's supposed to make me feel something," Harry said. Hermione's face went through approximately 5 emotions very quickly and landed on something that looked like complicated guilt. She walked to the roundabout, set her enormous stack of books down with considerable care, and sat on the edge of it. She looked at him directly, brown eyes very earnest, very open. "You should know," she said, "that in the wizarding world, you're considered a hero. Your parents, James and Lily Potter, they were brilliant and brave. They fought in a war against a dark wizard named Voldemort and they died protecting you. And whatever happened that night, whatever magic you produced as a baby, it destroyed him. Sent him away, maybe killed him, nobody knows entirely. But you ended the war and everyone's been celebrating your survival for 8 years without," she faltered. "Without making sure you were all right. Which is," she said, and her voice got very precise, "inexcusable." Harry had heard his parents mentioned maybe twice in his life, both times by accident, both times with the Dursleys' faces snapping shut like traps. He looked at this girl, this Hermione Granger with her ink-stained fingers and her 17 bookmarks, and felt something loosen in his chest, something old and structural, like a beam that had been under pressure for a very long time. "James and Lily," he said, trying the names out. "They were wonderful," Luna said softly, without looking up from her magazine. "The portraits of them at the ministry glow a different color than the others. I noticed when my father took me once. Their light is gold. Everyone else is silver." Harry looked at his hands. Hermione leaned over and kissed his cheek. The same cheek, the same spot, and Harry didn't know if that was coincidence or something else entirely, but the moment her lips made contact, the warmth that had been building in his face and chest and throat ignited. That was the only word for it. Not exploded, not violent, not painful. Ignited. Like a fireplace that's been laid perfectly, the logs positioned, the kindling set, everything waiting, and then the match drops, and the whole thing catches. The roundabout spun by itself. 3 full rotations, slow and stately, without anyone's feet touching the ground. The pigeons, who had scattered, came back in a rush of gray wings and landed in a circle around the edge of the playground, perfectly spaced, and sat there looking inward like an audience that had been waiting for curtain up. The swing set moved. Both swings arced forward simultaneously, chains taut, and then settled back. The wind, which had been half-hearted all morning, stopped entirely. In the silence that followed, Harry heard something that he would spend years trying to describe accurately and never quite manage. It was not a sound, exactly, but it occupied the space sound normally lives in. It was deep and resonant and came from somewhere underneath the ground and inside his own ribs at the same time. Like the world exhaling. Like something immense becoming still after a long period of movement. Like something finding where it was supposed to be. All four of them felt it. He could see it in the way Daphne's hand tightened on her book. In the way Luna looked up from her magazine for the first time with something other than serenity on her face, something that was awe, slow and private. In the way Hermione's hand flew to her sternum, pressing against the bone, her breath short. In the way Harry's scar, for the first time in his memory, felt warm instead of angry. "What," said Daphne, into the silence, "was that?" "I don't know," Hermione said, and she was already thinking, you could see it, the wheels turning, the references being cross-indexed. But it felt like, she pressed harder against her chest. It felt like something completing. "Soul magic," said Luna, in the same tone you might use to say good morning. She looked at them each in turn, Harry, Daphne, Hermione, and then back to Harry, with those pale, clear eyes. Very old. The kind the book stopped writing about because they couldn't fit it in boxes. A pause. "We're connected now." "That's not," Daphne started. Stopped. Started again. "Soul bonds of that magnitude require formal casting. Ritual components. Bloodline compatibility assessments. My grandmother described the theoretical process and it takes months of, it didn't ask permission," Luna observed. Daphne looked at her. Looked at Harry. Looked at her own hand on the book. She turned her palm over slowly, and even in the grey park light, there was something, just for a moment, just the ghost of it, a faint luminescence along the lines of her hand, like something written in ink that was almost dry. Gone in a second. Hermione pulled in a sharp breath. "It's real," she said, and the wonder in her voice was cracking through the composure. "It's actually real. I've read theoretical papers, Prendergast wasn't the only one, Borgin wrote something in 1743 about a documented Triwitch configuration and he called it," she stopped herself. "Sorry. I do that. The relevant point is that this is documented, if barely. A Triwitch soul bond. 3 witches, 1 magical focal point." She looked at Harry. "You." "Me," Harry said. "Don't panic," Daphne said, in a tone that suggested she was also instructing herself. "I'm not panicking." Harry looked around the park, the circled pigeons, the still air, the faint warmth radiating from somewhere just behind his sternum. "I've never panicked. Things happen around me all the time. I'm used to it." Daphne looked at him carefully. "What kinds of things?" So he told them. He didn't plan to. But the words came out and he couldn't stop them, not in the way you can't stop bleeding. He'd kept so many secrets for so long out of necessity, because telling the Dursleys anything only made things worse, because there was no one to tell, and now there were 3 people looking at him with something that was not pity, not alarm, not the particular uncomfortable look adults gave him when he mentioned something odd. They looked interested. They looked like they understood. He told them about the wig. About ending up on the school roof when the older boys chased him. About the time he'd spoken to a snake at the zoo and it had spoken back, and the glass had vanished, and Dudley had gone face first into the tank. He told them about the cupboard under the stairs with its spider population and its careful pencil marks measuring his height each year, always in his own handwriting because no one else did it. He told them about the way his aunt looked through him at breakfast as though he were a piece of furniture that had been badly arranged, and the way his uncle's hand felt on his collar, and the way Dudley's gang cornered him on the way home from school. He said it all in a flat, even voice, and he watched their faces. Daphne went very still about 30 seconds in and stayed that way. Hermione's expression rotated through grief and fury and something that looked almost like nausea in quick succession. Luna put down her magazine entirely and listened with her eyes very open and her hands in her lap. When he finished, it was quiet again. "You've been living like that," Hermione said finally, "while the wizarding world has been sending owls to children more famous than you because they won a regional Quidditch tournament." Her voice cracked and she stopped and pressed her lips together. "I'm sorry. That's irrelevant. She looked away, jaw tight. "It's not right. It's a significant magical crime, actually," Daphne said, and her voice was very controlled and very cold. "Under the family magic statutes of 1892, any magical minor placed with non-magical guardians is entitled to magical welfare assessment every 3 years. Someone has been deliberately failing that obligation." She was quiet for a moment. "Someone high up enough to make sure it didn't get flagged." "Dumbledore," Hermione said, quietly. They looked at each other. "He placed me there," Harry said. He didn't know how he knew it. But sitting in this park with the warmth of the bond moving through him like slow fire, with these 3 people who had offered him something freely and without expectation, something was becoming clearer. Not angry clear. Just clear. "Didn't he?" "Yes," Daphne said. "He's the one who removed you from the magical world that night. Everyone knows that part." "A beat. What happened after is apparently classified." "He probably had a reason," Luna said. "He usually does. But having a reason doesn't mean the reason was right." She tilted her head slightly. "Harry, are you all right?" He thought about it honestly. His lip hurt. His shoulder still ached where Dudley had shoved him into the wall yesterday. His stomach was doing something complicated and structural, shifting around in a way that felt like walls coming down. "Not yet," he said. "But I think I will be." Luna smiled her agendaless smile. They stayed in the park until 3:30. Daphne taught him the 13 pureblood family names that controlled the Wizengamot and why that mattered. She did it in the crisp, no-nonsense way of someone who had been sat down and given this information at age 6 like a recitation, and she clearly expected him to retain it, and he did, because he had a good memory and because the way she delivered information assumed you were capable of handling it, which was more than most people had assumed about him. She told him about the ministry's structure, and the difference between statute law and ancient charter right, and the fact that as the last of the Potter line, he almost certainly held a seat on the Wizengamot that no one had occupied in 9 years. "They can't just keep that empty," Harry said. "They've been keeping a great many things empty," Daphne said, and left it at that. Hermione pulled 5 books from her stack and cross-referenced them with a speed that suggested she'd read all of them before and was simply navigating from memory. She found 3 references to documented historical soul bonds, not try-witch configurations, but dual bonds and 1 4-person constellation, and read the relevant passages aloud, stumbling over the older language but mostly managing. The 4-person bond, recorded in 1347, had produced effects that the recorder described as music-made architecture, which meant nothing to Hermione and seemed to mean everything to Luna. "The bond will grow," Hermione said, running her finger under the text. "Over years. It's not static. The more we interact, the more it develops. Each person brings a different kind of magic and the constellation amplifies all of them." "What do I bring?" Harry asked. Hermione looked at him. She seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "The Prendergast says the focal point is usually, the text calls it the living absence. Someone whose magic has been building with nowhere to go for a long period of time. It creates a kind of pressure. And the 3 bonded witches' magic fills the structure and it all just," she made a gesture with her hands, "out and then in, opening and closing, resonates." "So I'm a bell," Harry said. "You're not a bell," Daphne said, with a precision that suggested she found the metaphor inadequate. "You're the architecture. The 3 of us are." She stopped, seemed uncomfortable with whatever she'd been about to say, and settled for, "It's not a hierarchy. The bond isn't structured that way. It's a web. Every point equally bears the weight. Luna looked up at the sky. Clouds are moving east, she said. It'll rain properly in about 20 minutes. Daphne looked at the sky and then back at Harry. You should go home before your guardians notice. The word guardians landed with the weight of something that knew it was inadequate. Harry stood up, and the roundabout creaked under the adjustment of weight, and the pigeons, who had been sitting in their patient circle this whole time, all took flight at once, lifting in a mass of gray and white and disappearing over the rooftops. He looked at all three of them. Luna, cross-legged, upside-down, magazine closed in her lap. Daphne, sitting straight-backed, her book held against her chest like a shield she'd forgotten she was holding. Hermione, surrounded by her stack of research, ink on 3 fingers, eyes bright with about 9 different lines of thought all running parallel. He said, "Will I see you again?" "Yes," said Daphne, immediately, as if this was not a question worth entertaining. "The bond will make sure of it," Luna said. "Even if we don't plan to. We'll keep being in the same place." "I'll write," Hermione said. She was already tearing a corner from one of her bookmark pages. She wrote an address in very neat handwriting and held it out to him. "I know you don't have owls or anything, so, Muggle Post works fine. Until Hogwarts." Harry took the paper. Folded it. Put it in his pocket beside the pound coin. "Hogwarts," he said. 2 years, Daphne said. "Then we'll be in the same building." Something shifted at the corners of her mouth, not quite a smile, but the careful architecture of the space where a smile might eventually be built. "And things will be considerably more interesting." Harry walked to the park gate and looked back once. Hermione was already writing something down with her usual urgency. Daphne had opened her Boundary Ward book again, but she was watching him over the top of it with those calculating gray eyes. Luna waved, small and easy, like they'd done this 100 times before. He lifted a hand. Walked out through the gate. It started raining exactly when Luna had said it would. Number 4, Privet Drive was the same as always, closed curtains, manicured lawn, the particular suffocating tidiness of a house where nothing of consequence had ever been allowed to happen. The garden party had been moved indoors at the first suggestion of rain. Through the window Harry could see Aunt Petunia's guests arranged in a strategic social pattern around the sitting room, small sandwiches in hand, expressions of cultivated delight. He went in through the back, left his soaked trainers in the kitchen, padded upstairs, and went into the cupboard under the stairs not because he was told to but because it was where he thought, where it was quiet, where no one looked. He sat on his narrow mattress with his knees to his chest and put his hand to his cheek, right where they'd each kissed him. The warmth was still there. Lower now, more settled, less the shock of ignition and more the steady heat of a fire after the initial rush has died down and the real burning begins. It sat in his chest like a second heartbeat, distant but present, a pulse that wasn't quite his. 3 pulses, actually, he realized. Distinct. Different rhythms. One fast and precise, like a metronome that has thought carefully about its tempo. One slow and deep and entirely unconcerned with urgency. And one, rapid and layered, syncopated, like someone reading and tapping their foot at the same time. Daphne. Luna. Hermione. Harry laid back on the mattress and stared at the underside of the stairs, at the pencil-height marks in his own handwriting, at the spider in the corner who he had named Gerald and who had been there longer than most of the furniture. James and Lily Potter, he thought. They were wonderful. He said the names out loud in the dark of the cupboard, quietly, just for himself. James. Lily. Testing the shapes of them. Finding that they fit somewhere he hadn't known was empty. He thought about Daphne's face when she'd said someone should have told you a long time ago. The way Hermione's voice had cracked and she'd pushed through it. The way Luna had said you're sad but you're not unhappy with the complete and undefended confidence of someone who trusts their own perception entirely. He thought about the world exhaling. He thought, 2 years. Outside, rain hit the window in earnest now, the proper downpour Luna had forecast, drumming against the glass and flooding the gutters and darkening the manicured lawn of Privet Drive to something that almost looked natural. In the sitting room, his Aunt Petunia laughed at something a guest said, high and hollow. In the cupboard under the stairs, Harry Potter closed his eyes. He was not afraid. He had not been afraid, he realized, since about 10:30 that morning, since a girl in a yellow moonhem dress had told him he was sad but not unhappy and kissed him on the cheek for reasons having to do with invisible creatures, and the world had cracked open slightly and shown him what was inside. Something ancient. Something warm. Something that had been waiting for him specifically. He was 9 years old and he had a split lip and he was sleeping in a cupboard and 2 years suddenly felt like no time at all. He kept his hand against his chest, over the 3 quiet pulses, and slept better than he had in his entire short life. 3 miles away, in a neat terraced house, Hermione Granger sat at her desk and opened a fresh notebook. She pressed her pen to the first page and wrote in large letters at the top, TRI which sole bond, research and documentation, H. Granger. She stared at it for a moment. Underlined it. Turned to the second page and started writing so fast the words blurred together, filling lines without stopping, all the references and the cross-references and the theoretical frameworks and the way the warmth had felt. She wrote that too, in careful scientific language that still couldn't fully contain it. Anomalous thermal sensation, cardiac adjacent, consistent and rhythmic, appears external in origin, 3 distinct. She stopped. Read what she'd written. Added a note in the margin, it felt like being found. She stared at that for a long time and then didn't cross it out. 8 streets in the other direction, in the Greengrass family's London townhouse, Daphne sat in the library with her grandmother's journals open around her in a careful arc, cross-referencing passages with the kind of focused precision that usually gave her headache relief rather than the headache itself. She found the passage she was looking for in the 3rd journal, handwritten in her grandmother's cramped, urgent script. The triconfiguration is not myth but it is older than our current understanding of bonding magic entirely. If it were to occur spontaneously, without ritual, the implications for the focal point's power level would be, the next line was crossed out so thoroughly that even holding it to the lamp didn't help. Daphne stared at the black lines. She thought about Harry Potter's face when she'd told him he was famous. The way it hadn't cracked or shifted or done anything dramatic. Just gone very still, with an attention like someone listening to a sound from a great distance. She went back to reading. She made notes in her own tight handwriting. She did not think about the warmth in her hand because thinking about it made it stronger and she wasn't ready to have a feeling that big yet. And somewhere between Surrey and London, in a house that was harder to find than most because it had been built in a place that felt like a gap between regular geography, Luna Lovegood sat in a window seat with her upside-down magazine and did not read it. She held it and watched the rain come down on the garden below, where the dirigible plums grew luminous in the wet grey light, orange and improbable. She thought, the bond found us. Not the other way round. She thought about Harry's face, not the split lip, though she'd noticed it, but the look underneath. The particular kind of careful that meant someone had learned very early that the world was not inclined to be gentle, and had made their peace with it so completely that they'd stopped noticing it as a loss. She touched her own cheek, same side as where she'd kissed him. The warmth was there, steady and deep and old. Like something tidal. Like something the moon controls. She turned her face to the window and listened to the rain and felt the 3 distinct pulses in her chest, sharp precise, warm steady, and then Harry's, which was different from all the descriptors she had, which was just, quietly, there. Constant. Unhurried. Like something that had always been true and was only now making itself known. Outside, the rain hit the dirigible plums and made them glow brighter. Luna smiled. Chapter 2. Letters and Tremors. The first letter arrived at number 4, Privet Drive on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the park. It came through the regular post, which meant it had a stamp and an envelope and absolutely nothing about it that should have alarmed anyone. Harry collected the mail from the doorstep before his uncle could, as was his morning responsibility, and found it tucked between the electricity bill and a catalogue for garden furniture. The return address said H. Granger, 14 Nightingale Close, London, and his name was written in very neat handwriting with a fountain pen. He put it in his sweatshirt pocket and delivered the rest of the post to the kitchen table without expression. He read it in the cupboard before Dudley was awake. Dear Harry, I've spent 3 weeks reading everything I can find about Tri-Witch soul bonds, and I want to tell you what I know, but first I want to say that I've been thinking about what you told us, and I think you should know that what's happening to you at your relative's house is not normal or acceptable by any standard, magical or muggle, and when we get to Hogwarts I intend to look into what legal remedies exist under both jurisdictions. Now, the bond. The short version: it's real, it's permanent, and it's going to keep growing. The longer version requires about 14 pages, which I've attached. The really important part is this: a Tri-Witch configuration is specifically documented in Prendergast, 1891, in a partial manuscript held at the British Library that most people think is fiction but isn't, and in 3 separate Greengrass family historical records that Daphne has been generous enough to share with me. She wrote to me first, which I found both impressive and slightly alarming given that I hadn't given her my address, but she explained that her family keeps records on all magically identified children, so I suppose that makes sense. What the 3 sources agree on: the bond amplifies each individual magical signature through a process of resonance, not merging, not overriding, amplifying. Think of it like 4 instruments playing the same note. Each one is still its own instrument, but together the sound is something that a single instrument cannot produce. What this means practically: our magic will respond to each other's distress, proximity will strengthen all of our abilities, and over time will develop what Prendergast calls sympathetic awareness, which is a very restrained way of saying we'll know things about each other without being told. I can already feel when you're unhappy. I don't know if you've noticed that. It feels like a pressure behind my left eye. Luna says she knew you were in the park before she arrived. She says the Raxpert theory is partly true and partly she just felt a pull. I believe both are accurate for different reasons. Daphne hasn't said what she feels, but she sent me 4 owls in 3 weeks with annotated research, so I think we can infer. Write back when you can. You can use regular post. I don't mind waiting. Yours, Hermione. P.S. I've included a basic introduction to wizarding history, a primer on wandless magic theory, and a reading list. I know you said no one's told you anything, so I thought we should fix that. The list is ranked by priority, not alphabetically. I know that might seem strange, but trust me, start with Bathilda Bagshot. There were 14 pages attached, dense with footnotes. Harry read all of them. He wrote back that afternoon, sitting on the floor of the cupboard with a torch and a biro and a piece of paper torn from a school notebook. His handwriting wasn't as neat as Hermione's. He wrote about the Dursleys in short sentences that didn't ask for anything, just stated things. He wrote that he'd felt what she described, not a pressure behind his eye. For him it was more like a shift in temperature, a sudden drop that happened sometimes at night that he thought might be her working late and getting frustrated. He wrote that he'd noticed Luna's pulse in the bond was the most constant, like it never changed speed regardless of what was happening, and he thought that was probably accurate to her personality. He wrote, I started the Bagshot. You're right, it should be first. I'm reading at night with a torch. I've read about 200 pages. The bit about the founders is strange because Slytherin comes off worse than the others, but the footnotes suggest Bagshot had a bias, which the introduction mentions but then doesn't account for properly. I think Slytherin's actual position was more complicated. He paused. Added, Daphne will probably appreciate that observation. He posted it the next morning on his way to school. By October they had a rhythm. Hermione wrote the longest letters. They arrived twice a week, sometimes 3 times, always dense and cross-referenced and occasionally containing small folded pieces of additional research that had occurred to her between the last letter and this one. She wrote about magical theory and about her school and about her parents, who were warm and present in her descriptions in a way that made Harry feel something complicated that he chose not to examine too closely. She wrote, once, about sitting in her bedroom at night and feeling the bond like a lit window on a dark street, knowing there were 3 other people out there who were, in some fundamental sense, part of her constellation. It's strange, she wrote. I've never had friends. Not real ones. People find me a lot, and then they find me too much. But this is different. The bond doesn't let you find me too much because it already knows everything worth finding. Daphne's letters were shorter, precise as a scalpel, and relentlessly useful. She wrote about wizarding politics and family structures and the 17 things Harry should know about the Wizengamot before he set foot in it. She wrote about the Greengrass family's position, technically neutral in the last war, allied to neither Dumbledore's faction nor Voldemort's, which she explained was less cowardice and more a deliberate strategy of remaining capable of influence regardless of outcome. She wrote this without apparent discomfort, which Harry found interesting. Neutrality is not the same as indifference, she wrote. My grandmother was neutral politically and furious personally. She hid 3 Muggle-born families in the estate's secondary properties during the worst of it. The records were kept out of the official family history because my father is an idiot about perception. I'm telling you because you should know who we actually are, not who the political record suggests. Harry read that letter 4 times. Luna's letters were the strangest and the most necessary. They came on whatever day they came, never predictable, sometimes just a few lines and sometimes enormously long. She wrote about Raxperts and Nargles and creatures that had no corroboration in any official magical taxonomy, but she also wrote about her father's magazine, The Quibbler, and the stories they ran that the Daily Prophet wouldn't touch, and she wrote about her mother, who had died in a spell accident when Luna was 7, and she wrote about it without grief in the way you describe something that has been processed so completely it has become part of the landscape. I think the bond knows about loss, she wrote, in one letter. I think it chose people who understand that things can be gone and still be present. Your parents. My mum. Daphne's grandmother. Hermione's feeling of being too much. All of it is the same shape. The bond recognized the shape. Harry held that letter for a long time. He didn't write about the Dursleys very much. He mentioned specific incidents in a matter-of-fact way when they were relevant. When Vernon locked the kitchen and he went a day without eating, he mentioned it to explain why he'd been too tired to finish the Bagshot. When Dudley's friends cornered him and he'd somehow ended up on the school roof with no memory of climbing there, he mentioned it because Hermione would find the accidental magic interesting and she did, 3 days later, with 4 pages of analysis. What he didn't write about was the way the bond had started responding to these things before he could. The morning after the kitchen was locked, he woke up to find a small package on the doorstep, addressed to him in handwriting he didn't recognize but that smelled like whatever Luna's yellow dress had smelled like in the park. Inside was a carefully wrapped piece of shortbread, a note that said "Eat this, please" in large round letters, and a small card with a pressed flower that had no name he knew. He ate the shortbread on the way to school and felt the warmth in his chest pulse once, strong and deliberate, like a hand briefly pressed to his shoulder. He didn't ask how she'd known. He wrote back saying thank you and she wrote, "The bond told me in a dream." It does that sometimes. I think it will do it more as we get older. The second year passed differently from the first, partly because he was now reading voraciously and partly because he was no longer entirely alone with himself. He found that the bond changed the texture of the cupboard. Not physically, it was still small and dark and smelled like old coats and spider, but it felt less like confinement and more like a base of operations. He had books now, hidden under the mattress, borrowed from the local library and augmented with 2 packages that had arrived with no explanation that he was fairly certain were from Daphne, because they were wrapped in green paper and contained entirely practical titles about magical law and wizarding governance with passages bookmarked in crisp, deliberate folds that no librarian would make. He started doing something that he thought of, privately, as settling into the bond. At night, when the house was quiet, he'd lie on the mattress and pay attention to the 3 pulses. He got better at reading them. Hermione's rapid layered one had variations. It sped up when she was excited, went clipped and short when she was annoyed, and occasionally stuttered in a way that he'd learned meant she was trying not to cry. Daphne's precise pulse occasionally lost its metronomic regularity, and those moments always corresponded, he eventually worked out, to something happening in her family, a letter from her father, a visit to the Greengrass estate, something political. Once, in February, Daphne's pulse went very flat and very controlled for 3 straight days, and then on the 3rd night spiked, just once, hard and sharp, and then settled back into its usual steady pace. He wrote the next morning, "Are you all right?" Her response came 2 days later, "My father informed me that I am being considered for betrothal discussions with the Knott family. I informed him I was not. We disagreed thoroughly. The matter is resolved for now." A pause, then, "Thank you for asking." He wrote back, "If he tries to push it forward, tell me and I'll deal with it." He meant it plainly, no bravado, just factual. The Potter name apparently carried weight he hadn't started using yet, but that didn't mean he couldn't. Her next letter was shorter than usual, but the handwriting was different, softer at the edges, less like a document. It said, "I know. I'll tell you. I won't need you to, but I'll tell you." Spring of the 2nd year brought something new. Harry was in the school corridor, walking back from the bathroom, when he heard Dudley and 4 of his friends behind him, and the particular quality of their footsteps, spread out, slightly too fast, the acoustic arrangement of a hunt, and felt, in the same instant, something move through the bond like a current. Not a warning, not a word, just a shift in all 3 pulses simultaneously, as though they'd all sensed the threat through him. And then something happened that didn't involve a roof. He turned around. He didn't run, didn't flinch, didn't produce the usual hunched shoulder body language that his cousin's friends had come to associate with him. He just stood in the corridor and looked at them. And the warmth from the bond moved into his hands, into his chest, into the space he occupied, and he felt, not large exactly, but fully present. Like a bell that had been struck and was ringing at its full resonance. Dudley stopped. Harry didn't say anything. He just waited. Dudley said, "What are you doing?" Harry said, "Going back to class." Something about his voice, the lack of anything in it that invited pursuit, made Dudley's friends look at each other. The particular ecosystem of bullying requires the target to occupy a certain role, and Harry had simply vacated it. The dynamic needed a response from him to function, and he wasn't giving one. They walked past him. Not away from him, past him, going somewhere else, with the slightly off-balance energy of people who had started a program and found the channel had changed. Harry went back to class. He wrote to Hermione that night, "I think the bond is doing something to my baseline state. I notice that I'm less afraid than I used to be. Not bravado. Just, things seem smaller. Or I seem the right size for them." He paused. "Is that what Prendergast means by sympathetic resonance?" She wrote back within 24 hours, "Yes. The focal point of the bond, over time, draws the amplified magical signatures of all 3 witches and uses them to stabilize and reinforce their own inherent magic. Basically, we've been bolstering you without trying, just by being connected, and you've been doing the same for us. I've been much better at maths this term, which I initially attributed to studying but now think is partly your influence, since you mentioned you find numbers intuitive. Also, I've been sleeping better. Luna told me she's been finding it easier to talk to people. And Daphne," a gap, then, "Daphne hasn't said, but I think you know." He did know. Daphne's pulse had been steadier since the betrothal argument. Less controlled flat and more genuinely calm. The letters from Hogwarts arrived in July. Harry's was waiting on the doorstep on a Tuesday morning, delivered not by regular post but by a large tawny owl that sat on the letterbox with the absolute confidence of an animal that has never doubted its welcome anywhere. It had an envelope sealed with a wax crest, a lion and a snake and an eagle and a badger in a circular arrangement, and inside was the letter he'd been reading about in Hermione's summaries for 2 years. He opened it in the kitchen before his aunt and uncle were downstairs. Read it twice. Felt the bond pulse with a warmth so sudden and collective it was clearly all three of them reacting simultaneously to their own letters, 3 miles and 8 streets and however far Luna was away from him. He put the letter in his pocket. He was at the kitchen table eating toast when Vernon came downstairs and found the owl still sitting on the letterbox. What followed was not a conversation. It was Vernon's voice raised at a volume that shook the cabinet doors, and Petunia's sharp indrawn breath, and Dudley's alarmed face appearing at the top of the stairs, and Harry sitting at the kitchen table with his toast and not saying a word until the noise reached a particular pitch that seemed to require some response. "I'm going to Hogwarts," Harry said. "You are absolutely not." "I am," Harry said, with the flat, factual certainty of someone describing the weather. He looked at his uncle with the same quality of attention he'd given Dudley's friends in the corridor, not hostile, not defiant, just present. Fully occupying the space. "It's a school. I've been accepted. I'll need school supplies." Vernon's face was doing several things. "I will not have this abnormality in my house. It's been in your house for 10 years, Harry said. "That part's not new." Vernon's color moved through red into something approaching purple. "I'll need the Hogwarts letter forwarded," Petunia said, suddenly, from beside the kettle. Her voice was strange, stripped of its usual performance. Just a voice. Vernon turned on her. "Petunia, he's going," she said. Still strange. Not warm, nothing like warm, but something that had more under it than Harry had ever heard from her. She turned back to the kettle and switched it on with the decisive click of someone ending a conversation. Harry looked at the back of her neck. He thought about what Hermione had told him, that his mother, Lily, had been Petunia's sister. That Lily had been magical and Petunia hadn't, and that there were whole categories of feeling that could be stored in that fact, most of them painful. He didn't say anything else. He finished his toast. A letter arrived from Hermione 2 days later. "My parents have agreed to take you shopping for school supplies in Diagon Alley. Daphne's mother has offered to accompany us and provide guidance on which items are worth the expense and which are overpriced tourist traps. Luna's father will meet us there. I've cleared it with my mother and she said, and I'm quoting directly, 'The more the merrier, we'll make a day of it. August 4th. Can you come?' Harry wrote back, yes. He'd never had plans before. Not in the sense of something to look forward to, something that existed in the future with his name specifically attached to it. He became aware of this fact when he found himself aware of the date each morning without needing to look at a calendar. August 4th, 12 days. 11. 10. The bond warmed with something he could only describe as anticipation. All 4 of them at once, building for days, until the morning of August 4th when he got on the bus to the junction Hermione had specified and felt the pulses in his chest all go bright and quick like candle flames in a sudden breeze. He arrived first. He stood on the pavement outside the leaky cauldron, which looked like nothing from the outside, just a gap between buildings that the eye kept sliding off, and waited, and 2 minutes later a car pulled up and Hermione got out before it had fully stopped, brown curly hair loose around her face, carrying a new notebook already half full, talking before she'd finished standing upright. "I've been doing research on Ollivander's wand selection process because I want to understand the theory of wood and core compatibility before we go in." "Good morning," Harry said. She stopped. Looked at him. Something in her face did the thing it always did when they were actually in the same space, some recalibration that happened when 3-dimensional reality confirmed the 2-dimensional thing the bond had been maintaining. Like eyes adjusting to better light. "Good morning," she said, and smiled, and it was a proper smile, unmanaged, catching her slightly off guard. Her parents introduced themselves, her father with a handshake that clearly came from a man who found warmth easy, her mother with an appraising look that somehow managed to be both assessing and completely kind, and a comment that he had very good posture for someone his age which made Hermione make a face. Daphne arrived in a car that was considerably more expensive looking, with her mother, who was a precise, elegant woman with Daphne's eyes and an additional layer of cool that suggested she'd been practicing for 30 years. She looked at Harry for a long moment. "Mr. Potter," she said. "It's good to meet you properly." The word properly carried weight. "Mrs. Greengrass," Harry said. He'd been reading about pure-blood forms of address for 2 years. He watched her register this and recalibrate slightly. Daphne came and stood beside him. She was wearing dark green and her hair was down, which he'd never seen, and she looked at him with those silver-gray eyes and said, without preamble, "You've grown." "You're still short," he said. Her eyebrow went up. Hermione made a sound that was not quite a laugh but occupied the same territory. The corner of Daphne's mouth moved. Luna arrived last, as expected, with her father, who was an extraordinary-looking man with dirty blonde hair and a look of cheerful complete confidence in the fundamental interest of the universe. He was wearing robes that had small celestial charts on them and he was in the middle of a sentence as he arrived that seemed to have no necessary beginning, which is why I think the ministry's ban on crumplehorn snorkack research is less about safety and more about political hedging. But I have a meeting with Senator Archibald in October that should clarify. Luna spotted Harry and walked straight to him and hugged him. Not a greeting hug, just a hug, complete and uncomplicated. Harry returned it, slightly surprised, and then not surprised at all. She stepped back and looked up at him. "You're bigger," she said. "The bond is bigger too. Can you feel that?" He could. Standing here with all three of them in the same actual physical space for the first time since the park, the bond was something entirely different from what it was across letters. It was full, resonant, alive in a way that the distance had only suggested. It moved through him like deep music. "Yeah," he said. "I can feel it." Hermione was already writing something down. Diagon Alley was an experience that Harry stored in a private section of memory he was building specifically for things that confirmed the world was larger and stranger and more full of possibility than Privet Drive had ever suggested. He walked through it with the 5-sense alertness of someone taking inventory, the noise, the smell of old parchment and something sweet from the apothecary, the impossible height of Gringotts at the far end, the window displays of things that moved and glowed and occasionally winked. His Gringotts vault was the first real confirmation that his life had a different shape than the one he'd been handed. He'd known about it from Hermione's letters, known it abstractly, but abstract and standing in the cart rattling down into the earth with heat rising around him were two different things. The vault door opened and Harry stood in the entrance with gold firelight on old stone and more gold than he'd ever seen in any context, and felt something in his chest go very still. Not excited. Not overwhelmed. Still. "This is mine," he thought. Not with greed but with the particular certainty of a fact that reorders other facts. "This is mine, and someone tried to make sure I never knew about it." He filled the bag the goblin gave him without counting. He knew roughly what he had from Hermione's notes on the Potter estate accounts. He carried the bag out with the ease of someone who has made their peace with something. Daphne watched him do this and said nothing, but her pulse in the bond did something that felt like quiet approval. Madame Malkin's robes, the bookshop, the apothecary, Hermione bought twice what was on the list and annotated her receipt, and then Ollivander's, where the wandmaker looked at Harry for a long moment from behind the counter with pale, lamp-like eyes and said, "I have been wondering when I would see you, Mr. Potter," in a tone that suggested this was something he'd genuinely been curious about and not just a shopkeeper's greeting. The process took 45 minutes. Wand after wand, each one producing either nothing or the wrong something, a vase exploding, the ceiling briefly catching fire, a stack of boxes launching themselves at the wall with considerable enthusiasm. Ollivander watched each result with an expression of scientific interest that never tipped into concern. When Harry finally picked up the wand that was right, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, the shop didn't just fill with light. The light went upward through the ceiling, through the building above, and emerged from the chimney, visible from the street, a column of gold and deep red that held for 4 full seconds before settling down. People walking past stopped and looked. Inside the shop, all four of them felt the bond resonate, once, like a struck gong, the vibration moving through each of them in a clean perfect wave. Ollivander looked at Harry and then looked, deliberately, at Daphne, at Hermione, at Luna. "Interesting," he said, quietly, with the tone of a man who uses that word the way other men use extraordinary. "Very interesting indeed." His pale eyes moved back to Harry. "Curious. That wand and one other share a core, Mr. Potter. I wonder if you'll meet its brother someday." "I know the story," Harry said. He did, from Hermione's 14th letter. Ollivander nodded once, like a question had been answered. Outside the shop, Harry held the wand, and the warmth in the bond held, and around them Diagon Alley went about its business entirely unaware that something had just been confirmed here that would take years to fully understand. Hermione's father bought everyone ice cream from Florian Fortescue's. They sat outside in the August sun, all seven of them around two small tables pushed together, and it was the most normal thing Harry had done in his life and also the most extraordinary. Luna's father was explaining his Snorkack research to Hermione's mother, who was listening with the polite fascination of someone genuinely trying to track what they were hearing. Daphne's mother and Hermione's father were in some conversation about non-magical dentistry that had taken an unexpected left turn into the magical treatment of dental pain, which her mother was finding professionally significant. Daphne was eating her ice cream and watching Harry. 3 weeks, she said. He nodded. September 1st. Platform 9 3/4. Hogwarts. Everything changes, she said, and it wasn't a warning, it was just a fact, delivered in the same way she delivered all facts. Good, Harry said. Her pulse did the thing again. The quiet approval. He was starting to think it might be something else, something more specific than approval, but he didn't push it. There was time. Luna leaned across the table and stole a piece of his ice cream with complete serenity. The bond is going to be very different when we're all in the same building, Hermione said, with the tone of someone who has been thinking about this for 2 years and is now very close to finding out if the theory holds. Different how? Harry asked. She opened her mouth to answer. Looked at the three of them, Harry with his wand in his jacket pocket and the gold warmth of Ollivander's still in the air, Daphne cool and steady and already thinking about chess moves 6 turns ahead, Luna watching a pigeon with transparent pleasure, and closed her mouth. I'll tell you when I know, she said. Some things you have to see to describe. She was right, as she usually was. But none of them could have described, from this side of it, what would happen in 3 weeks when the bond walked into Hogwarts and Hogwarts looked back. That night, back in the cupboard under the stairs, Harry lay on his mattress with his wand on the floor beside him. He hadn't used it, hadn't tried it yet, underage magic laws applied to deliberate casting, and besides, he wasn't in a rush. It would be there tomorrow. The bond hummed with the residue of the day, all 4 pulses warm and close even across the distance, the full resonance of the afternoon still trailing. He thought about Ollivander's eyes. About the column of gold and red light through the ceiling. He thought about the way the magical world had looked at him all day, some people recognizing him, the lightning bolt scar above his eyebrow, the double take and the murmur, and how he'd felt about that, testing the feeling carefully the way you test weight on a frozen pond. Not uncomfortable. Not flattered. Just, aware. Aware that there was a version of Harry Potter the Wizarding World had built in his absence, a story they'd told themselves for 10 years, and that version had very little to do with a boy who read by torchlight in a cupboard and wrote letters in biro and had learned to read 3 heartbeats across miles of distance. He was going to walk into that world in 3 weeks, and the story was going to have to revise itself. Outside, a warm wind moved through the street. Somewhere, an owl called. The lightning bolt scar on his forehead was warm, not angry. Harry closed his eyes, felt the 3 pulses in his chest, precise, deep, layered, and the thought that surfaced was not dramatic, not braced against anything. It was just simple and solid and true. Let them look. Chapter 3, Platform 9 3/4. The train station smelled like diesel and pigeons and the particular anxiety of people running late, and Harry walked through it with his trolley and his owl, a tawny owl he'd bought in Diagon Alley and named James, which he hadn't told anyone yet, and found the Grangers waiting at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 at exactly the time Hermione's most recent letter had specified. Hermione was wearing her robes already. Her parents were taking photographs. "You're wearing your robes on the platform," Daphne said, arriving from the left with her mother and a trolley that had been packed with the geometric precision of someone who considered space management a discipline. "We're still in a Muggle train station." "I know where we are," Hermione said. "You look like a Halloween costume." "I look like a student, which is what I am." "You look like a student who started 2 hours early." Harry watched this exchange with genuine pleasure. It had the rhythm of people who had been writing to each other for 2 years and were now discovering what their dynamic felt like in 3 dimensions, and the answer was apparently immediate, comfortable, and slightly combative in the way of people who actually like each other. Luna arrived with her father from the direction of the main entrance, walking at a pace that suggested time was a suggestion. She was wearing her robes with a necklace of what appeared to be butterbeer corks, and she had tucked a small sprig of something purple behind her ear, and she looked entirely correct. Her father embraced her, said something in her ear that made her smile, kissed the top of her head, and then turned to Harry with an expression of warm, uncomplicated recognition. "Mr. Potter. I've been meaning to write to you about something your father once contributed to the Quibbler. A letter in 1984. I'll send you a copy." Harry's chest did something complicated and immediate. "I'd like that," he said. "Very much." Xenophilius Lovegood beamed and patted his arm and launched into a summary of the letter's contents, something about misidentified magical creatures in the Highland region, and Harry listened to every word. The barrier swallowed them one by one, and platform 9 3/4 opened up on the other side like a world that had been waiting behind a door. The Hogwarts Express was red and enormous and real, sitting in its own column of steam, and the platform was dense with families and trunks and owls and the particular noise of a large number of people at a significant moment. Harry walked out onto it and felt the bond shift again, the full resonance of all 4 of them in the same place, but amplified now by proximity to something magical in the platform itself, something old and built in, like the stone knew what kind of people walked over it every year. People noticed him almost immediately. He could feel it moving through the crowd in a wave, the double take, the nudge, the murmur, and he walked through it without adjusting his pace or his expression, Daphne on his left, Hermione already talking to his right, Luna slightly behind, watching a family of owls with transparent interest. A woman with red hair and 7 children detached from the crowd, and her eyes found him, and her face did something enormous and immediately suppressed. She was clearly trying to decide whether to approach. Harry looked at her and found he knew who she was without needing to ask. Hermione had written about the Weasley family with thorough affection, describing them as the kind of magical family that ran on noise and love in equal measure. He nodded at her, once. She looked like she might cry. She collected herself, smiled, said, "Welcome to the magical world, dear," in a voice that was extremely controlled for how much feeling was behind it, and then her children pulled her away toward the train and the moment passed. Daphne had watched this. She said, quietly, "She knew your mother." "Yeah," Harry said. "I know." He said goodbye to the parents. Hermione's mother hugged him, which he didn't quite know what to do with and stood slightly stiff through, and she seemed to understand this and didn't comment, and then they were on the train with their trunks loaded and finding a compartment, and the platform noise diminished to something outside a window, and the world they were leaving was on one side of the glass and the world they were going toward was on the other. They found a compartment near the middle of the train and settled in. Harry put James's cage on the rack. Luna arranged her things in the particular Luna way, which involved placing certain items in positions that had clear meaning to her and obscure meaning to everyone else. Hermione opened a book. Daphne looked out the window. The train began to move. "All right," Hermione said, without looking up from her book. "I've been thinking about the sorting." "Of course you have," Daphne said. There are 4 houses. Traditionally, and I say traditionally because the actual hat doesn't purely follow the founder archetypes, it's more nuanced than, we're going to be separated, Harry said. A brief quiet. Probably, Hermione said, and she did look up now. The bond doesn't override the hat. The hat reads your mind, or something close to it, and places you based on, the bond will be fine across houses, Daphne said, with the certainty of someone who has thought about this longer than she's going to admit. Distance doesn't weaken it. The whole first year with letters and it only got stronger. I know that, Hermione said. I just think we should discuss it. Openly. Because we all have thoughts about where we'll end up and none of us has said them out loud. Luna turned from the window. I'll be in Ravenclaw, she said. The hat will take one look and know. She said it without pride or disappointment, just acknowledgement. Ravenclaw, Hermione said. She said it like she was testing it against her own expectation. Me too, I think. Unless, she stopped. Unless Gryffindor, Daphne said, with something that might have been the first degree of actual humor Harry had ever heard from her. Hermione Granger, who has had an opinion on every subject since the age of 7 and has never once declined to voice it in the face of opposition, might be considered brave. Hermione looked at her. What about you? Slytherin, Daphne said. My entire family. Without question. She said it flatly, no apology in it. I know what that means to most people. It means you're strategic and ambitious and you value self-determination, Harry said. Which is accurate. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, not much, just a small recalibration, the way a compass needle steadies. Yes, she said. It is. I'll be in Gryffindor, Harry said. How do you know? Hermione asked. He thought about it. Because I've spent 10 years in a situation that kept trying to make me afraid and I kept refusing. That's not bravado. That's just what I am. A pause. The hat will see it. Nobody argued with this. Outside the window, London gave way to suburbs, then to open countryside, green and gold under September sky. The compartment door opened twice in the first hour. The first time was a round-faced boy with a toad in his hands and a desperate expression, asking if anyone had seen it. They hadn't. The toad clearly had not been in their compartment, but Luna said she thought it had gone toward the front of the train because toads preferred north-facing spaces, and the boy said really, with so much genuine gratitude that Luna smiled her full agenda-less smile and he seemed slightly dazed. Neville Longbottom, Hermione said, after he left. His parents, she glanced at Harry. He lost his parents to the war too. Different way, but, I know, Harry said. He'd read about the Longbottoms in one of Daphne's annotated books. We'll be friends. You don't know that. Yes I do. He said it simply. He looked at me and didn't do the double take. Just asked about the toad. I like him. Hermione made a note. The second time, the door opened and a boy Harry had never met walked in as though he owned the compartment, with 2 large boys flanking him and the absolute confidence of someone who has never been told no by anyone his own age. He was pale, blond, sharp-featured, and he looked at Harry with a recognition that had been prepared in advance. Harry Potter, he said. Not a greeting, an assessment. Malfoy, Daphne said, from her corner, without looking up from the window. Her tone was the one she used for things she had already categorized and found uninteresting. Malfoy's eyes moved to her, then to Hermione, then to Luna, and his expression went through something complicated. He clearly hadn't expected this particular grouping. He recovered quickly. Didn't expect to find you with interesting company, Greengrass. I know, Daphne said. Malfoy looked back at Harry. He extended a hand. Draco Malfoy. My father, Lucius Malfoy, Harry said. Wizengamot seat, old money, former Voldemort associate who claimed Imperius Curse after the war. He said it in the same informational tone Daphne used for things she was reciting. Daphne's correspondence has been very thorough. Malfoy's hand stayed out for one long moment. Then he withdrew it. "You'll want to be careful," he said, and something about the way he said it, not quite a threat, but occupying the same building, about who you associate with. "Starting off on the wrong side of the wrong people would be, Malfoy," Harry said. "I grew up in a cupboard being told I was worthless by people who were afraid of me. You're going to need to bring something significantly more alarming than social positioning to that conversation." Silence in the compartment. Malfoy's jaw tightened. One of the large boys behind him shifted his weight. "We'll see," Malfoy said, and the words had the quality of someone saving something for later, which Harry actually respected as a tactical choice even if the motivation was tedious. He left. The door slid shut. Luna looked up from the window. "He's unhappy," she said. "The blustering kind of unhappy. There's a raxbird around him the size of a cat." "His father," Daphne said, still looking out the window. "Lucius has been managing Draco's entire life as a political asset since he was born. Every friendship, every impression, every word. A beat. I know something about that." The compartment was quiet for a moment with the particular quality of something true being acknowledged. "He'll be an enemy or an ally," Harry said. "Depending on which direction he chooses. I'll leave that up to him." Hermione looked at him with something that was very close to surprise and then wasn't. She turned back to her book. The bond settled. Hogwarts appeared through the window as a darkness larger than the dark around it, towers against the last edge of September sky, lit windows in the heights, and the lake below it holding its reflection like something the water was proud of. Harry looked at it through the glass and felt the bond respond to the castle the way a tuning fork responds to its note, immediate, certain, recognition across a gap. "Home," something in him said, involuntary as breathing. He didn't say it out loud. But Daphne, beside him, pressed her lips together and looked away from the window with the careful expression of someone managing an emotion she hadn't expected. Luna said, softly, "It remembers us." "We've never been here," Hermione said. "No," Luna agreed. "But the bond has." The boats were cold and the castle was enormous and the inside of it was more than architecture. It was the sum of 1,000 years of magic concentrated in stone and wood and the particular quality of air that has had spells in it for so long it has a different texture. Harry walked through the entrance hall and felt the bond resonate off the walls, off the moving portraits, off the enchanted ceiling of the great hall where the sky outside lived above thousands of candles. He tipped his head back and looked at it. Hermione appeared at his shoulder, also looking up. "Bewitched to look like the sky outside," she said. "Technically it's just an enchanted ceiling, but the feeling of it—" "Stop explaining it," Harry said, gently. "Just look." She stopped explaining it. They both looked. The sorting happened the way Harry had expected it to, which was to say, it happened the way things happen when four people have talked about a subject for 2 years and now find out if the theory held. The hat went on Luna's head first, alphabetically later in the queue, but she stepped forward when a fifth-year prefect directing the line wasn't looking, and the hat said Ravenclaw before it had fully settled on her head. Luna smiled and walked to the Ravenclaw table as though she'd been here before. Hermione, the hat sat on her head for 40 seconds. She was very still. Then Gryffindor, announced with what Harry thought was a slight emphasis, and Hermione went to the Gryffindor table looking simultaneously vindicated and surprised. Draco Malfoy, Slytherin before the hat touched his head. He walked to the table with the specific ease of someone for whom this was always the only possible answer. Daphne Greengrass, Slytherin. She walked with the posture of someone who had known this, who was entirely at peace with it, and sat at the Slytherin table with the precise arrangement of someone selecting their position carefully. And then, Harry Potter. The hall was already at a low murmur from the moment his name was called. He walked to the stool, sat, and the hat went over his eyes. "Ah," said the hat, inside his head, and even the hat's mental voice carried that particular quality, the sound of something large recognizing something it hadn't expected. Well, this is unusual. You can feel it, Harry thought. The bond. I can feel considerably more than the bond, Mr. Potter. I can feel what the bond has been doing to you for 2 years. A pause that had texture. Slytherin would develop your intelligence. Ravenclaw your capacity for, you know where I belong. The hat was quiet for a moment. Yes, it said, and there was something in its mental voice that Harry couldn't quite name, not reluctance, not surprise, just the weight of something significant being confirmed. Yes, I do. I also know what you'll face there. I also know you already know and don't care. Correct. Then let's not waste each other's time. Gryffindor, the hat announced. The Gryffindor table erupted. The noise of it went up to the enchanted ceiling and bounced off the stars. Harry took the hat off, stood up, and walked to the table, and as he passed the Slytherin table he caught Daphne's eyes. She was watching him with those silver-gray eyes, calm and direct, and she gave him one small, precise nod, like a period at the end of a sentence they'd both been writing for 2 years. He sat down at the Gryffindor table beside Hermione, who said, "I knew it," with the tone of someone who would have been annoyed to be wrong. Neville Longbottom ended up 2 seats down and promptly knocked over his goblet in his enthusiasm at finding Harry at the same table, and Harry passed him a napkin without comment, and Neville said, "Thanks," and then looked at him properly for the first time. "You're actually real," Neville said. "So far," Harry said. Neville laughed, loud and startled and genuine. "Right," he said, and settled into the seat, and somehow that was the whole friendship, immediate and uncomplicated as a handshake. The Great Hall was in the middle of the feast when it happened. Harry was talking to Hermione about the enchanted ceiling and whether the charm was genuinely linked to the weather or just programmed to follow it, and Hermione was firmly on the side of genuine linkage and had 3 theoretical arguments, and he was listening and eating and letting the bond warm him through the meal. Luna across the hall at Ravenclaw, visible when he looked, giving him a small wave, Daphne at Slytherin, not looking over, but her pulse in the bond steady and calm. Then someone at the staff table looked at him, and the bond reacted. Not to a threat. To something else, something that the ancient magic in the bond recognized from a different direction entirely. Harry looked up at the staff table and found a man with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles looking at him with an expression of such complex feeling that even from 20 feet away it was impossible to simplify. Interest, and relief, and guilt, and something that looked uncomfortably like the expression of a chess player who has just seen their opponent make a move that changes the whole board. Dumbledore. Harry looked at him steadily. He didn't look away. He didn't smile or nod or perform any of the reactions the expression seemed to be waiting for. He just looked, and let the look be what it was, not hostile, not deferential, simply present. Dumbledore's expression shifted. The calculation moved to the surface for just a moment before being replaced with a warm smile that Harry felt the bond, quite instinctively, categorize as genuine but incomplete. He looked away. "He was watching you the moment your name was called," Hermione said, quietly, not looking up from her plate. "I know." The bond flagged him. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't think he's dangerous. But I think he has a plan for you, and the plan doesn't include," she gestured vaguely at the space between them. "The bond," Harry said. "Us," she said. He thought about that for a moment. "Then the plan needs updating." She made the almost laugh sound again. Under the table, very briefly, she pressed the back of her hand against his. At the Slytherin table, Daphne's pulse went warm. At the Ravenclaw table, Luna looked over at him and smiled, slow and certain, like someone reading a book they already know ends well. The bond made itself visible for the first time publicly in Charms class, 2 weeks into term. Professor Flitwick was a small, precise, enthusiastic man who loved his subject with the uncomplicated joy of someone who has found the thing they were made for. He'd spent 2 weeks on theory and foundational stance, and now it was the first practical class, Wingardium Leviosa, the levitation charm, simple, well-documented, achievable for most first years by their third attempt. Harry was in charms with Hermione and Neville and 20 other Gryffindors. Luna was in the next period with Ravenclaw. Daphne had charms on Thursday with Slytherin. They were not in the same room. This did not prevent what happened. Flitwick called on Harry first, which was not subtle. The man was clearly curious, it was written clearly on his small, expressive face. Harry pointed his wand at the feather on his desk, said the incantation clearly, gave the correct wrist motion. The feather rose 6 feet and kept going. It went to the ceiling. Then through the ceiling, which was not supposed to be possible, then apparently through the floor of the classroom above, because 30 seconds later there were shouting noises from upstairs. The feather came back down through the hole it had made. The ceiling was now repairing itself with the slightly annoyed efficiency of centuries-old castle magic, and settled on Harry's desk. The class was very quiet. Harry looked at his wand. Then at the feather. Then at Flitwick, who was standing on his pile of books with an expression of professional wonder. "Fascinating," Flitwick said, in the tone of a man using the only word that covers the available territory. "Mr. Potter, did you feel anything unusual during the casting?" "The wand got warm," Harry said. "Only the wand?" Harry glanced at Hermione, who was 3 seats away and had her hand pressed to her sternum with an expression he recognized, the one that meant the Bond had just done something she'd need to write 4 pages about tonight. "The wand got warm first," Harry said. Flitwick looked between them. Something moved across his face, recognition, genuine and rapid, of a more experienced magical scholar. He opened his mouth, closed it, made a note, and said, with complete composure, "Excellent first attempt. We'll discuss calibration in the next practical. Miss Granger, would you like to try?" Hermione's feather went to the ceiling and stopped there. It wouldn't come down. "The Bond is leaking into your intent," she muttered, more to herself than to Harry, with the tone of someone annoyed at finding their hypothesis correct in a slightly inconvenient way. Neville's feather exploded. Entirely unrelated to the Bond. Just Neville being Neville. Harry and Hermione both helped him sweep up the pieces without making anything of it, and Neville shot Harry a look of pure gratitude. After class, Flitwick said, "Mr. Potter, a moment," and when the rest of the class had gone, stood in front of him with his hands clasped and his expression serious and kind in equal measure. "I don't mean to alarm you," he said, "but what I observed in your casting is consistent with, and I am using this term carefully, amplified sympathetic resonance across a shared magical configuration." He paused. "Am I correct?" Harry looked at the small professor. "Yes." Flitwick held very still. Then he said, quietly and with complete sincerity, "Mr. Potter, I need you to understand. What you carry is not a problem to be managed or a complication to be contained. It is the most significant piece of ancient magic I have encountered in 40 years of teaching." He looked up at him. "I don't know who you've been told to be careful around. But I can tell you I am not one of them. If you ever need guidance on what the Bond does in a practical spellcasting context, my door is open." A beat. 7 in the morning, before the students arrive. "Tea will be ready." Harry looked at him for a moment. The Bond gave nothing, not suspicion, not alarm, just the quiet warmth of something that found no threat in what was being offered. "Thursday," Harry said. "I'll come Thursday." Flitwick's face went bright with the uncomplicated pleasure of a man who loves his subject and has just been handed something extraordinary to study. "Splendid," he said. "I'll use the good cups." That evening, Harry wrote 3 short letters. To Luna, Charms class. The feather went through the ceiling. Flitwick knows what the Bond is and he wants to help. Thought you should know. To Daphne, the Bond showed in a practical class today. Flitwick flagged it and offered guidance. He seems genuine. Your assessment? To Hermione, write everything down while it's fresh. All of it. We'll compare notes Thursday. He sent James with the 3 letters in turn. The owl took to carrying messages with the focused pride of someone who has found their vocation, and then lay back on his Gryffindor bed and stared at the canopy. Neville, in the next bed, said, "What was that in charms today?" Harry considered how much to say. Looked at Neville, his earnest face, his steady eyes, the particular quality he had of being completely without guile. The bond gave something that wasn't a signal exactly but was more like the absence of a warning. "Something old," Harry said. "Magic that happened to me before I could remember." Neville nodded slowly. "My gran says old magic is the only kind that matters. She sounds right. She's terrifying. But usually right." He paused. "Are you going to be in trouble for the ceiling?" Flitwick seemed more curious than concerned. "He gave you tea?" "Not yet. Thursday." Neville processed this. "I've been trying to get him to talk to me about herbology applications in charms for 3 weeks and he keeps saying during class hours." Harry said, "Come Thursday." Neville looked at him. Something in his face went still and then warm. "Yeah. 7 in the morning. The professor has good cups, apparently." Neville smiled, the wide, unself-conscious smile of someone who doesn't smile carefully. "Right," he said. "Yeah. Good." Dumbledore came to find Harry on a Wednesday evening in the 2nd week of October. It was not a summons, no note through the prefect, no formal request. Harry was in the library with Hermione when the headmaster simply appeared in the aisle between Charms Theory and Advanced Transfiguration, hands folded in his robes, expression warm and somehow careful, like a man approaching a complex mathematical problem he finds personally interesting. "Harry," he said. "Not Mr. Potter. I wonder if you'd take a walk with me." Hermione looked up from her book. Then she looked at Harry. Harry closed his own book. "Sure," he said. They walked through the castle, and Dumbledore talked about Hogwarts, its history, its architecture, the way it had been built to shift and grow with the needs of its inhabitants, and Harry listened and walked and let the bond run a quiet assessment in the background, reading the old man beside him the way it read everything now, with the accumulated sensitivity of 2 years' practice. What it found was complicated. "The sorting surprised me," Dumbledore said, eventually. They were on the 3rd floor, near a window, moonlight coming in clean and white. "Not Gryffindor, that I expected. The circumstances of your placement. The bond's effect on the sorting hat." He glanced at Harry. "It spoke to you at some length." 30 seconds, Harry said. "The hat rarely needs more than 5. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "I have some knowledge of Tri-Witch soul bonds." "Not much, the documentation is sparse, as I'm sure Miss Granger has discovered." "She has." "Then you know they are rare. Extraordinarily rare. And that their implications for the focal point are significant." Harry stopped walking. He turned to look at Dumbledore directly, and the old man stopped too, and they looked at each other in the moonlight with the castle around them, and Harry felt the bond settle into a calm, alert readiness like a well-trained thing. "Professor," Harry said, "I think you placed me with the Dursleys knowing I'd have limited access to the magical world. I think that was deliberate. I think you had a plan for me, and the plan required me to arrive at Hogwarts at a certain level of preparation." He said it evenly, without accusation, just laying it out. "I want to know if the plan involved me being smaller than I am." Dumbledore's face was very still. "No," he said, after a moment, and something in the word was genuine, not defensive, not smooth. "Not smaller. Humble, perhaps. Protected from expectations that might have." He stopped. "I see now that I made several significant errors in that reasoning." "Yes," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him, the full weight of those blue eyes, the intelligence in them, the guilt moving underneath the warmth like a current beneath still water. "You are not what I expected," he said, and it was not a complaint. "And the four of you together are," he seemed to reach for a word and find none that would do. "Uncontained," Harry said. "I was going to say remarkable." "Both," Harry said. Something moved through the old man's expression that Harry could only call recognition. Not of Harry specifically but of a type, the type of person who looks at a structure that has been carefully built and walks straight through the middle of it without malice, simply because the walls were never the right height. "I think," Dumbledore said, carefully, "that I owe you a great deal of explanation." "You do," Harry agreed. "And I'll hear it. But not tonight." He turned and started back toward the library. "I have research to finish." He heard Dumbledore exhale, behind him. Not frustrated. Something more like a man releasing a breath he'd been holding for 10 years. Harry walked back to the library and sat down across from Hermione, who had not moved and had clearly been reading the same line of text for the past 20 minutes. "Well," she said. "He knows about the bond. He made mistakes. He knows he made them." Harry opened his book. "He's not an enemy. But he's not an ally. Not yet." He found his page. "Give him time." Hermione looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to her book. Under the library table, a candle flame that had been burning low straightened and burned bright, for no reason that either of them could have explained, and stayed that way till closing time. Chapter 4, What Lives in the Walls. October in Hogwarts had a specific quality that Harry had not anticipated, not the cold, which was manageable, and not the workload, which was significant but interesting, but the way the castle itself changed. The corridors got darker earlier. The portraits got more animated, as though they too felt the shift in the light and responded to it with more opinions. The staircases moved more frequently, as if restless. The lake outside went the color of iron, and the giant squid surfaced once on a Tuesday morning and Harry watched it from the breakfast table through the high windows, a dark shape moving through dark water, immense and unhurried. He found he loved it. All of it. The drafts, the moving suits of armor, the way the great hall smelled different in the evening than in the morning. He loved the Gryffindor common room's particular fire smell and the sound of the castle at night when the portraits were asleep and it was just stone and old magic breathing together. He was happy. He registered this fact the way you register the absence of pain, not dramatically, not with announcement, just as a change in baseline that had become normal enough to notice only when he stopped to look for it. Neville had become a constant. He appeared at Harry's shoulder in herbology with insights about magical plants that were so specific and richly observed that Professor Sprout twice left off what she was doing to listen to him, and Harry watched this with satisfaction because Neville hadn't yet learned to lead with his knowledge rather than apologize for it, and Harry was engaged in a patient campaign to fix that. He'd started by simply asking Neville questions in public settings, at the Gryffindor table, in herbology, in the common room, questions he didn't need the answer to, that were entirely for the purpose of getting Neville to hear himself speak with authority. Hermione noticed. "You're doing something deliberate," she said one evening, watching Harry ask Neville to explain mandrake growing cycles to Ron Weasley, who had appeared in their orbit gradually and then suddenly, the way weather develops. "Just asking questions," Harry said. "You already know the answers." "He doesn't know I know." She looked at Neville, who was mid-explanation now, animated and specific, Ron listening with genuine attention. Then she looked at Harry with an expression that had warmth in it that she wasn't entirely managing. "You're going to be insufferable," she said. "Probably," Harry said. Ron Weasley had arrived in their ecosystem the same way large enthusiastic things generally arrive, loudly, sideways, and in a way that turned out to be exactly what was needed. He'd sat across from Harry at breakfast one morning in the third week, put an enormous amount of food on his plate, looked at Harry, and said, "My mum cried when she told us about you," with the complete guilelessness of someone who has not yet decided that honesty requires editing. Harry had said, "I heard she knew my mother." Ron had said, "Yeah. She doesn't really talk about it but she keeps your picture. The one from before." He'd gone back to eating with the efficient focus of a boy who has 6 siblings and has learned that breakfast is competitive. I think you being here is important to her. Harry had thought about Molly Weasley's face on the platform. The enormous, suppressed thing in it. I'll make sure to say hello to her, he'd said. Ron had grinned. She'll actually die, he said, with brotherly affection. That was the whole of it. Ron was present after that, easy and warm and extremely funny in the specific way of someone who has never had to try to be funny, who is simply built with an instinct for the comic angle of any situation, and Harry found this restful in a way he hadn't expected. Hermione found Ron occasionally maddening and often essential, a combination she was still working through. It was the last day of October when the troll got in. Harry felt it before the announcement. He was in the Gryffindor common room after the Halloween feast, which had been spectacular and loud and orange in all directions, and Hermione had gone ahead. She'd left the feast early, something sharp and upset in her bond pulse that Harry had noticed halfway through dessert. The pulse had been doing that on and off for 3 days, a low-level distress signal that tasted like wounded pride, and Harry had been running through likely causes when he'd overheard Ron say something about her showing off, which he'd filed as the probable source and which he intended to address. He didn't get the chance because that was when the bond went from low-level signal to something entirely different. Not distress. Fear. Specific and sudden and directional, cutting through his chest like a cold blade. He was on his feet before he knew he'd stood up. Harry? Neville looked up from his herbology essay. Hermione, Harry said, already at the portrait hole. The castle-wide panic hadn't started yet, Professor Quirrell's screaming hadn't reached the tower, but the bond had told him what he needed to know 3 seconds before any external information arrived, and those 3 seconds mattered. He went through the portrait hole. The corridor was empty. He went left, toward the bathroom where Hermione sometimes went to read when she didn't want company, which he knew because she'd written about it in one of her letters, the specific piece of a quiet bathroom and a complicated text, and he was moving fast, not running, the kind of fast that's controlled and purposeful. He felt a second presence flare in the bond, Daphne, somewhere below, her pulse going sharp and alert in the specific way that meant she'd registered the same signal and was already moving. And Luna, across the castle in Ravenclaw Tower, a flash of pale awareness that said I know, I feel it, I'm coming. The castle lurched. Or not the castle, the air inside the castle, a vibration moving through the stone, something enormous moving through corridors that were not built for it, something that had no understanding of architecture and was therefore unconstrained by it. He turned the corner and smelled it before he saw it. The troll smell was extraordinary, the kind of smell that predates civilization, that belongs in swamps and deep caves, a concentrated animal reek that hit him like a wall and made his eyes water. He pushed through it and saw the bathroom door ahead, closed, and then heard the crash from inside and felt Hermione's fear spike to a level that moved him from fast walk to something close to a sprint. He hit the door with his shoulder and came through. The troll was 12 feet tall. Harry took this in the way you take in something that requires immediate recalibration of your frame of reference. It was not like the pictures in books, was the first useful observation. Books had prepared him for scale and they had failed to prepare him for presence. It filled the room. Its club was currently embedded in the sink beside the window, which had been part of the wall until about 3 seconds ago, and plumbing was running water down the rubble and Hermione was pressed against the opposite wall, wand out, not frozen. Hermione did not freeze, it was not in her nature, but working the problem with the rapid, cornered focus of someone whose brain is running at full capacity in a situation that does not have a good answer yet. She saw Harry. Something in her expression shifted, relief and also something fiercer underneath it, a recalibration of her own odds that landed closer to adequate. Blasting jinx won't stop it, she said, immediately, as he came through the door, because of course the first thing she said was a tactical assessment. The hide is too thick, it'll just redirect the force. The eyes are the weak, the troll turned toward Harry. Harry looked up at it. He felt the bond, very clearly, in that moment, not the warmth this time but the full resonant structure of it, the four-point constellation, and something else beneath that, the ancient magic itself, the thing that had woken up in a park in Little Whinging 2 years ago, coming fully awake in a way it hadn't before. Like a sleeping animal feeling something enter its territory. He pointed his wand at the troll and said, very clearly, Wingardium Leviosa. The troll went up. Not just its club. Not its feet. The entire 12-foot, approximately 1-ton mountain troll, lifted off the bathroom floor and hit the ceiling and came back down, and Harry caught it before it could complete the fall and held it there, 6 inches off the ground, which seemed the safest option given that a troll dropping from standing height would create structural problems. It was hanging there, upside down, confused in the specific way of something that has never been subject to forces it couldn't understand, and it was making a noise like a building settling, and Harry held it with his wand arm extended and his breathing steady and felt the wand burning hot in his fingers and the bond burning hotter in his chest. Hermione stared at the suspended troll. 6 feet through the ceiling was apparently an understatement, she said. Are you hurt? No. She pulled a piece of rubble from her hair. I had a plan. It was a less elegant plan than yours. What was the plan? Blinding jinx on the eyes followed by a severing charm to the ankles. That's not a bad plan. It's a significantly worse plan. She looked at the upside-down troll, which was now completely still in the manner of something that has stopped understanding its situation and has moved on to hoping it improves. Harry, how long can you hold it? Long enough, Harry said, which was not a lie. He could feel the bond supporting the spell the way the park roundabout had spun by itself, the ancient magic taking some of the weight, making the effort less individual and more structural. The door burst open. Not just the bathroom door, the wall beside it, which had apparently been weakened by the troll's earlier activity, came partially in as well, and Daphne and Luna came through the resulting gap with the coordinated efficiency of people who had been moving together and hit an obstacle and adapted without breaking stride. Daphne took in the room, the rubble, the running water, the upside-down floating troll, in about 2 seconds. Her wand was out. She looked at Harry and then at the troll with her silver-gray eyes doing rapid assessment. Binding charm, she said. On the wrists and ankles. If you lower it to the floor I can restrain it before it recovers enough to resist. Do it now, Harry said. I'll lower on your mark. She didn't verify or check, she just raised her wand and said, Mark, and Harry lowered the troll to the floor in one controlled movement while Daphne's binding spell hit it in 3 precise points, wrists, ankles, and the back of its neck, a silvery cord of magic pulling tight with the efficiency of someone who had learned this spell not from a textbook but from somewhere more practical. The troll hit the floor bound and stayed there. Luna, throughout this, had been standing at the edge of the room with her wand at her side, and she said, in her most conversational tone, it's dreaming now. The binding charm crossed with the confusion from the levitation and it went into something like sleep. I could feel it shift. She tilted her head at the troll. It's not angry. It was just lost. It was trying to murder Hermione, Daphne said. Yes, Luna said. But it didn't know it was doing that. It was just moving through a space it didn't understand and making the space around it the size of itself. She paused. That's not malice, that's just largeness without awareness. The 4 of them stood in the ruined bathroom around the bound, sleeping troll, plumbing running water over old stone, and the bond was something enormous and warm and fully present between all of them in the same physical space for the first time since Diagon Alley, and Harry felt it like standing too close to a fire in the best possible way. You came across the castle, Hermione said to Daphne, and there was something in her voice that was trying not to be moved and failing. The bond told me, Daphne said, simply. She did not look at Hermione when she said it. She was examining the binding charm with the critical focus of someone checking their own work. From the dungeons, Hermione said. It was a fast walk. Daphne. Daphne looked at her then. Held it for a moment. You're part of the constellation, she said. That's what it means. She looked back at the troll. Don't make it sentimental. Luna said, it's very sentimental, with complete contentment. Daphne looked at the ceiling. The professors arrived 90 seconds later, McGonagall first, Flitwick close behind her, Quirrell last with his turban slightly askew and his eyes doing something that Harry's bond awareness filed without analyzing yet. McGonagall's face went through a sequence of reactions that began with alarm and ended in an expression Harry could not entirely read but that contained, in its depths, a quality not unlike the one Flitwick had shown in Charms, the look of someone encountering something that genuinely surprises them at the level of their expertise. She looked at the bound sleeping troll. She looked at the four of them, Harry's wand still warm in his hand, Daphne's binding charm still silvery and tight, Hermione with rubble in her hair, Luna with her wand at her side as though she'd never needed it. She said, "Explain." Harry explained. He did it in chronological order, accurately, without embellishment. He said he'd felt that Hermione was in trouble before the castle-wide alarm and had come immediately. He said Daphne and Luna had arrived simultaneously. He said he'd levitated the troll and Daphne had bound it. He said it in the same tone as everything else, factual and even. McGonagall's eyes moved between them during this account. When he finished she was quiet for a full 5 seconds. "The troll is bound," she said. "With a 4th-year binding charm." "3rd year," Daphne said. The Greengrass tutors moved quickly. McGonagall looked at Daphne Greengrass in Slytherin robes standing in a ruined Gryffindor-adjacent bathroom at 11 o'clock at night and said, with considerable composure, 5 points to Slytherin for exceptional spellwork under pressure. She looked at Harry. 10 points to Gryffindor for initiative and execution. She looked at Hermione. 5 points to Gryffindor. For not dying. "I had a plan," Hermione said, with dignity. "I'm sure you did." McGonagall's voice was dry but something in her face was doing the Flitwick thing, the thing of a person encountering something they will be thinking about for a long time. "Miss Lovegood. Ravenclaw." She seemed to be reminding herself. 5 points. "Thank you," Luna said. McGonagall turned to Quirrell. "Professor. Please contact Hagrid about removing the troll." Her voice was entirely professional and yet somehow conveyed exactly what she thought of someone who had allowed a troll into the castle. Quirrell flinched slightly and went. McGonagall looked at the four of them one final time. "You will all return to your dormitories," she said. "We will discuss this further. For now, well done. All of you." She said it in the clipped way of someone for whom well done is not a mild compliment but a significant one. "Go." They went, Daphne and Luna toward the dungeons and Ravenclaw Tower respectively, Harry and Hermione toward Gryffindor, and they walked in silence for a while because the bond was saying everything that mattered more efficiently than words. At the portrait hole, Hermione stopped. She turned and looked at Harry, and her face had the expression it got when she'd been managing something large for a while and was allowing it to surface now that the management was no longer required. "I heard you coming," she said. "Before you came through the door. I felt it." "I felt you scared," Harry said. She nodded. Pressed her lips together. "I hate that I was scared." "You had a plan." "I know. I still hate it." She looked at her hands. "I'm glad the bond works the way it does." "Me too." She went through the portrait hole. Harry followed. In the common room, Ron and Neville were awake by the fire waiting with the specific energy of people who had heard something happened and needed information, and Harry sat down with them and told the story a second time, and this time there was less detail and more warmth, and Neville looked equal parts horrified and awestruck, and Ron said, "You levitated the whole troll?" With the exact expression of someone filing an anecdote for the rest of their life, and Hermione corrected 2 minor technical points in Harry's account, and the fire burned and the common room was warm and the bond settled into the contented hum of 4 people who had faced something together and come through it intact. Harry went to see Flitwick the next morning. He had been going every Thursday and now it was Friday, but Flitwick answered the door at 7 with tea already made and the expression of a man who had been expecting this, which suggested he had either been informed about the previous evening or had simply understood that significant events produce visits. "The troll," Harry said, sitting down. "I heard," Flitwick said. He handed over tea. It was, as promised, a good cup. "Tell me about the levitation." Harry told him about the levitation. He described the warmth in the wand, the way the bond had supported the spell, the sense of the ancient magic coming fully awake under pressure in a way it hadn't in ordinary classroom practice. Flitwick listened with his hands around his own cup and his eyes intent. When Harry finished he was quiet for a moment. "The bond functions as an amplifying framework for your inherent magic," Flitwick said slowly, as though working it out in real time. "In a low-stakes situation, classroom practice, it contributes but doesn't overwhelm. Under genuine threat to one of the bonded parties, it activates at full output." He looked at Harry. "Do you understand what that means practically? Under pressure I'm significantly more powerful than in a normal situation. Not just more powerful. You have access to a level of magical output that most adult wizards would find difficult to produce even after years of intensive practice." He set his cup down. "The wand can handle it." "Barely. Holly and Phoenix Feather, as I said, a remarkable pairing for what you are. But Mr. Potter, I want you to understand that you should be careful in one specific way." "Which way?" "Not careful about using it." "Never that." Flitwick's voice was firm. "Careful about targeting. The power will go where you direct it, but at high output the precision requirements increase. A spell that's slightly off-target in a normal context might be dramatically off-target at full bond amplification." He tapped his own wand against the desk, thinking. "We need to work on precision. Not power. You have enough of that." "Precision." Harry nodded. This was useful. This was the kind of information that came from someone who was thinking about him specifically, not about the abstract concept of an extraordinary magical event. "The other three," Flitwick said. "Miss Greengrass's binding charm was exceptional for any year level. Miss Lovegood's wandless assessment of the troll's cognitive state was, I'm not sure I have an accurate framework for it. Miss Granger had already produced a tactical analysis of the situation before assistance arrived." "She had a plan," Harry said. "She always has a plan." Flitwick smiled. "The four of you, together, operating under that bond, I think about the documented historical cases. The constellation of 1347. I think you will exceed it considerably." He refilled Harry's cup. "Now. Precision exercises. We start today." He put Harry through an hour of increasingly fine-grained levitation work, not heavy objects, the opposite, progressively lighter and smaller things, a piece of thread, a drop of water, finally a single fiber from a piece of parchment that could only be seen in direct candlelight, and Harry found that focusing the bond's energy the way you focus a lens, pulling it narrow rather than letting it spread, produced a precision that made the wand feel like an extension of thought rather than a tool. With its own momentum. By the end of the hour he could hold the single fiber of parchment stationary at any specified height and move it in any direction without losing it. Flitwick looked at this result with the expression of a man who has just confirmed something important and is already thinking about the next step. "Come Monday," Flitwick said. "And bring Miss Granger. She'll want to document this." "She's already documenting it," Harry said. "She started last night." "Of course she did," Flitwick said, warmly. The castle had a different quality after the troll. It was subtle, but Harry felt it, a slight shift in the way the stone attended, if stone could be said to attend to anything. As though the castle had been watching since September, running its own extended assessment, and the troll incident had been the final piece of data it needed. Doors that he hadn't tried before were now unlocked when he touched them. Not all doors, most remained properly shut, but specific ones, in specific corridors, as though a selective clearance had been extended. A room on the third floor that should have been locked opened when he put his hand on the handle, and he stood in the doorway and found a large, quiet room with no furniture and high windows and the particular acoustic quality of a space that had been used for something significant and still held the resonance of it. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. The bond was warm but calm. He closed the door and didn't go in. Not yet. He was learning to recognize the castle's pace. It offered things when it decided you were ready, not when you decided you wanted them. He mentioned the doors to Daphne in a letter. She wrote back, "The castle has a form of awareness documented in Hogwarts, a history, though Bathilda Bagshot understates it significantly. The structure is partially sentient, not intelligent in the way of a person, but responsive to intent and history. The fact that it is opening doors for you specifically is worth noting. It is not doing this for everyone." A pause. "I have also had a door open for me that should have been locked. In the dungeons. I went in. It was empty, but it smelled like the estate greenhouses at home. I'm not sure what to make of that." Harry wrote back, "The castle is telling you something." He paused. Added, "Or reminding you of something." She didn't respond to that for 2 days, which was unusual for Daphne, who normally replied promptly. When she did respond, the letter was short and the handwriting was the soft-edged kind, "Yes. I think you're right." Quirrell came to find him on a Wednesday evening. Not Dumbledore this time. Quirrell, stepping out of a corridor shadow in the manner of someone who had positioned themselves to appear accidental. He was wearing his turban and his usual expression of mild, harmless anxiety, and Harry felt the bond register him the way it had in the Great Hall on the first night, not alarm, not threat, something more specific and harder to name, the magical equivalent of a smell that doesn't belong. "Harry," Quirrell said, with his slight stutter, his warm diffident smile. "I was hoping, I wonder if you could help me find, I seem to have mislaid the charms classroom key, Professor Flitwick asked me to." "Professor Flitwick keeps his own key," Harry said. Quirrell smiled. "Of course. Silly of me." He didn't move. His eyes were doing something that his face wasn't. "I've heard such remarkable things about your progress this term." "The troll incident, quite extraordinary, thank you," Harry said. "The bond you carry must be, quite a weight. 4 people, all connected. One would think you'd want privacy from that sometimes. Room to be just yourself, without the influence." Harry looked at him. "The bond is part of me," he said. "There's no version of just myself that it isn't part of." Quirrell's smile stayed in place. His eyes did not smile. "Of course. I only meant, I know what you meant," Harry said. He met Quirrell's eyes directly and felt the bond, very clearly, do something it hadn't done before, not a warning pulse, not an alarm, but a kind of extension, a reaching out, as though it were trying to read something that was very close to the surface and also very carefully hidden. "Good night, Professor." He walked away. He wrote to Daphne that night, "Quirrell found me in a corridor. He was asking about the bond. Specifically about whether it feels like a weight or an external influence." A pause. "He was trying to get me to frame it as something separate from myself. As something that could be separated." Her response came the next morning, early, "Why would someone want you to believe the bond could be separated from you?" And then, in the crisp handwriting of someone stating a known fact, "Because they would benefit from the 4 of you not acting as a constellation. Isolated, each of you is formidable but individual. Together, you're something else. Someone wants to know if you can be divided." A beat. "Be careful around him, Harry. Not afraid. Careful." He read that distinction and appreciated it. He went to Flitwick that Thursday and mentioned Quirrell without mentioning Quirrell, described the interaction as a hypothetical, a theoretical question about whether bond connections could be severed. Flitwick's expression went very still. "Theoretically," Flitwick said, carefully, "a tri-witch soul bond of this nature is not something that can be severed by external action. It is not a charm. It is not a constructed enchantment. It is something the ancient magic produced spontaneously, and it has the quality of a fact of nature. You can no more sever it than you can sever the relationship between a wave and the ocean it belongs to. He paused. But someone might try. The attempt would be dangerous for the person who made it. The bond would respond to the threat. How would it respond? Flitwick looked at him with the particular clarity of someone deciding how honest to be and choosing completely. The documentation on this is limited, he said. But what exists suggests that a direct attack on the bond structure produces a counter-response proportional to the bond's total power. Which at this point, for the four of you, he stopped. I would not recommend anyone try it. Harry nodded once. Precision exercises. He went through the morning's work with the wand, focused and steady, the thread and the water and the single parchment fiber. He held the fiber perfectly still for 3 full minutes before letting it go. Better, Flitwick said, quietly. Much better. Halloween had passed and November arrived with cold that was serious rather than seasonal, and the bond between the four of them had deepened through the troll incident into something that Harry thought of as structural, not just warm and present but load-bearing, the kind of connection that you build on rather than simply feel. They had worked out a system for meeting. It was not technically against any rules because they had never tested whether the rules applied to them the way they applied to other students, a question they had never raised because it seemed tactically imprudent to invite a no when they hadn't yet received one. Harry and Hermione would come to a specific alcove on the 2nd floor at 9 on Tuesday evenings. Daphne came from the dungeons. Luna came from Ravenclaw. The castle, which had been opening doors for Harry, had apparently been doing something similar for all of them, because the route that should have taken Daphne past 2 prefect checkpoints somehow never did. They sat in the alcove and talked. No agenda, no structure. Hermione occasionally brought notes but she'd stopped apologizing for it. They talked about classes, about the bond, about what they were reading, about the castle. They talked about the things they were noticing. Luna had been spending time in the Ravenclaw common room listening to the older students talk and had gathered 3 separate pieces of information about the 3rd-floor corridor that the students treated as rumor but that she found oddly consistent. There's something there, she said. Something alive. I don't know if it's the door Harry found or something through it. It's a locked door, Hermione said. On the right side of the 3rd-floor corridor. It's in Hogwarts, a history as a maintenance storage area, but the entry was added in 1991, which is this year. New entry, Daphne said. Added specifically for this year. That means something was put there recently. She looked at Harry. Your door. I haven't gone in, Harry said. Why not? Waiting, he said. The castle's been pacing the information. I'm pacing with it. Daphne looked at him for a moment. She seemed to be evaluating the strategy and finding it sound. All right, she said. But we go together when we go. Obviously, Harry said. Her pulse did the warm approval thing and she looked away. Luna put her head on Hermione's shoulder with the complete comfort of someone who has decided a shoulder is available and is using it. Hermione stiffened slightly and then didn't, and reached up and patted Luna's hair once, awkward and gentle. Harry watched the castle shadows move. Quirrell is going to do something, he said. Nobody argued with it. Before Christmas, Daphne said. He'll want to move before the winter break separates us. Then we move first, Harry said. We find out what's through the door before he does. Next Tuesday, Hermione said. I'll have finished the research by then. I'll be done with the Greengrass family records on protective enchantment, Daphne said. I'll ask the castle, Luna said, in the same tone as the others. Harry looked at her. Ask it how? The same way it's been talking to you, she said. You've just been listening with the wrong part. She tapped her sternum, lightly, once. He thought about that for a long time after he was back in the Gryffindor dormitory, in the dark, with the bond warm and the 3 pulses steady, and he put his hand over his chest and tried listening differently, not waiting for information but offering presence, the way you sit with someone without requiring them to speak. The castle sighed, low and deep, like something immense shifting in its sleep. And behind his closed eyes, like a torch through water, something glowed on the third floor. Warm and golden and patient, waiting there in the dark the way it had always been waiting, not urgent, not afraid, just present. The stone, the bond told him, without words. He understood. He lay very still in the dark and felt the 3 pulses in his chest and the castle breathing around him and Quirrell 2 floors below and Dumbledore in his tower with his chess pieces and his guilt, and he thought, next Tuesday. Not afraid. Not braced. Just ready. Chapter 5, The Mirror Knows Nothing You Don't. The week before they went through the door, Hermione finished her research and called it incomplete, which Harry had come to understand meant she had enough to proceed but not enough to feel comfortable about it, which was approximately how she felt about most situations that involved genuine uncertainty. She brought her notes to the Tuesday alcove meeting and laid them out with the careful organization of someone who has been thinking about spatial layout as well as content. The 3rd floor corridor, she said. The door at the end. Whatever is behind it has been there since August at the earliest, the maintenance storage entry in Hogwarts. A history was added in July, which means it was placed here before term started. Deliberately, by someone with access to Hogwarts in the off-season. She looked at Harry. Dumbledore. Something he wants protected, Daphne said. Something he moved from somewhere else, Hermione corrected. Gringotts, I think. There was a break-in at Gringotts Vault 713 on July 31st, my birthday, actually, I remember reading it in the Prophet, and nothing was reported stolen. Which means either the break-in failed or whatever was in that vault had already been removed. He moved it before the break-in attempt, Harry said. Which means he knew the attempt was coming. Which means he knew who would make it. They looked at each other around that. Quirrell, Daphne said. Working for someone. Voldemort, Luna said, simply. The name landed in the alcove with the particular weight it always carried, but none of them flinched from it, which Harry noticed and was glad of. He had made a point of saying the name out loud since Hermione had first told him about the war, partly because flinching from words was a habit of people who had been made afraid, and he had decided not to be one of those people. Voldemort sent Quirrell to get whatever is in that vault, Hermione said. Dumbledore moved it here. Quirrell is here. She pressed her lips together. And Dumbledore has been, I think he's been leaving a path. The protections on the 3rd floor corridor, whatever they are, I think they're designed to be passable by someone with enough ability. Someone he expects to find them. A test, Daphne said. Or a trap. For Quirrell. With a specific person in mind to spring it. She looked at Harry with the expression of someone delivering information she doesn't enjoy having to deliver. Me, Harry said. Yes. Harry considered this. Outside the alcove the castle was its usual November night self, distant footsteps, the occasional portrait muttering, whined through the gaps in the old stone. The bond was steady and present around all 4 of them, warm in the cold corridor. He put it here for Quirrell to find, Harry said slowly, working it through. And he expected me to face Quirrell over it, at some point this year. As part of his plan. Something about the confrontation that's supposed to resolve the situation. Pawn to e4, Daphne said. Harry nodded. Except we're going Tuesday. Before Quirrell moves, before Dumbledore's timeline, because we go when we choose to. He looked at each of them. Whatever is through that door, we handle it ourselves. All 4 of us. Nobody's pawn. Hermione closed her notes. I'll spend the next 6 days on counter-enchantments, she said. Whatever protections are in there, I want to know them in advance. I'll write to my grandmother's contact at the ministry, Daphne said. There's a retired cursebreaker in Cornwall who documented the enchantments used in high-security magical storage. Cross-referencing might give us the sequence. Luna had her upside-down magazine out and was holding it without reading it, which Harry had learned was her thinking posture. "The stone," she said. They looked at her. "Whatever's in the vault." "I've been thinking about it since Harry mentioned feeling something through the door." She set the magazine down. "The Philosopher's Stone. Nicholas Flamel. He's in Alchemy, Ancient Art and Science in the Hogwarts Library, page 412. I read it by accident in September because the page smelled interesting." She said this without any apparent awareness that this was an unusual reason to read a page. "He's been alive for 600 years. The stone produces the elixir of life and can transmute base metals to gold. If Voldemort got it, he could create a physical body that wouldn't be destroyable the normal way." A pause. "That would be bad." Hermione stared at her. "You've known what it is since September?" "I've suspected," Luna said. "I didn't want to say it until I was more sure. I'm now more sure." "What made you more sure?" "Harry felt it through the door." She looked at Harry. The Bond recognized it. Old magic knows old magic. Daphne was already writing in her notebook. "Nicholas Flamel, Philosopher's Stone, Elixir of Life," she said, as she wrote. "The political implications if Voldemort gains a permanent physical form are." She stopped writing. Looked up. "We cannot let Quirrell get to that stone." "We won't," Harry said. The 6 days were the most academically productive of the term, which was notable because the term had already been productive. Hermione worked through counter-enchantment research with a focus that made her usual focus look like mild interest by comparison. She brought Harry updated notes every morning before breakfast, which Harry read at the Gryffindor table while Ron ate enough for 3 people and occasionally asked what Harry was reading, and Harry summarized it, and Ron listened with more attention than his relaxed posture suggested, and Harry had begun to think that Ron's intelligence was the kind that worked sideways, intuitive and spatial rather than textual, and that Hermione hadn't quite clocked this yet because she tended to measure intelligence by library hours. Daphne's contact in Cornwall sent an owl with a sealed letter on Thursday morning. She wrote to Harry in the afternoon, 7 protections. Confirmed. The sequence is, botanical, avian, something liquid, a chess problem, a logic puzzle involving poisons, a key, and something reflective at the end. The botanical one will require Neville. A beat. Tell him Thursday evening. He'll want preparation time. Harry told Neville on Thursday after herbology. They were walking back from the greenhouses, Neville still brushing compost from his hands, and Harry said, "I need your help with something Tuesday night. It involves plants." Neville stopped walking. "What kind of plants?" "Devil's Snare, probably. In low light, contained space." Neville was quiet for a moment. "For what?" Harry looked at him. He gave him the truth, the summary version, the essential structure, and watched Neville's face as it went through several adjustments and settled into something that was not quite bravery and was better than bravery. It was the expression of someone deciding that the right thing and the thing they were going to do are the same thing. "Right," Neville said. "I know Devil's Snare. I know how to make it release." He paused. "I know its weaknesses better than it knows mine." Harry clapped him on the shoulder once. "That's the attitude." Neville stood slightly straighter. Ron found out on Friday because Ron had the particular radar of someone who grew up in a large family where secrets had limited shelf life, and he appeared at Harry's elbow in the library and said, with uncanny accuracy, "Something's happening Tuesday and you haven't told me." Harry looked at him. "Chess," he said. Ron blinked. "Sorry?" "There's a chess problem. In the sequence. We need someone who can solve it in real time, under pressure, with live pieces." Ron was quiet for 3 full seconds. "Wizard chess," he said. "With actual chess pieces. Giant ones, probably." Ron's expression was the one he got when something had offered itself as a challenge and his competitive instincts had stopped all other processing. "I've never lost a chess game," he said. "Not once. Fred and George, Percy, my dad." He paused. "Charlie called it a fluke. I beat him 4 more times." "I know," Harry said. "That's why I'm asking." Ron's expression shifted from competitive to something quieter and more solid. He said, "Right. I'm in," with the same flat certainty that Neville had used, and Harry thought that the bond might not include Ron and Neville formally, might not have their pulses in his chest alongside the 3 that lived there permanently, but there was something in the way these 2 people had simply decided, without theater, that something needed doing and they would be part of doing it, something that felt like the bond's spirit, if not its structure. Tuesday arrived cold and clear, the castle quiet after curfew, corridors empty in the specific way of a building that knows something is happening and has cleared the stage. Harry had the invisibility cloak. It had arrived in December of last year, a package with no note, and he'd known without being told that it was from Dumbledore, and he'd thought at the time that this was the old man's version of arming the pawn, but he'd kept it because it was his father's and it was useful regardless of anyone's plan. He wore it over himself and Hermione as far as the 3rd floor. Neville came separately with his wand and a small pouch of powdered herb he'd prepared in the greenhouse at dawn. Ron came with his wand and the particular focus of a person who has been thinking about chess strategy since Friday. Daphne and Luna were already at the door when they arrived. Of course they were. Daphne had a parchment in her hand with the sequence written out in her precise handwriting, annotated with approaches to each problem. Luna had her wand in her hand and was looking at the door with the mild interest she brought to most things, which looked like serenity and actually contained, Harry had learned, an awareness sharper than almost anyone else he'd ever encountered. 6 of them outside the door. Harry put his hand on the handle. "Together," Daphne said. He opened it. The first chamber was the Devil's Snare, and it was dark as underground and smelled like green things that have never seen light, and it came for them immediately, tendrils of black vine, quick and deliberate, wrapping at ankles and wrists before they'd fully come through the door. Harry felt it on his left wrist and did not pull. He'd read enough to know that struggling was the mechanism, and said, "Neville." Neville was already moving. He had a small vial uncorked in one hand and his wand in the other, and he said something to the vines in a low, steady tone that Harry realized after a moment was not a spell, exactly, but something closer to instruction. Like speaking to something that understood its own language better than a generic command would address it. He used the wand to channel heat, a slow warmth rather than fire, and the vines retreated with the specific reluctance of something that dislikes being wrong-footed on its own territory. In 30 seconds the chamber was clear. Neville exhaled. "Devil's Snare hates warmth but it hates being spoken to more," he said. "It's got, not intelligence, exactly. But something like pride. You have to undercut the pride." Luna said, "I could have told you that," with complete warmth. "You could have told us a lot of things," Hermione said, not unkindly. They went through. The second chamber had the key, which should have been the simple one and was not, because 300 keys hung in the air on wings and only one of them was the right shape and the wings on the correct one were slightly bent from being used already. Hermione spotted it in 40 seconds. She pointed and said, "Third cluster from the left, 15 keys up, slightly irregular right wing." She was already looking for the broom. There were brooms. Harry was on one before anyone else had moved, and the key tried to avoid him because it had been trained to avoid hands, but Harry had been flying since October on the Gryffindor pitch in the early mornings and he cut off the key's angle with a riding instinct that had nothing to do with lessons and everything to do with whatever combination of Quidditch inheritance and bond amplification had been developing since the park, and he had it in his hand in 12 seconds and was back on the ground. In 15. Ron caught the door before it could swing shut. Harry unlocked it. The third chamber was water, a shallow flooded floor, and something in the water that Daphne assessed in 2 passes, walking the perimeter with her wand extended, and said, "Containment charm on a liquid medium. The Mirish variant. You have to solve the temperature before you can cross." She adjusted her wand angle and said something in what Harry recognized as Proto-Gaelic, which she had apparently been learning from the Cornwall contact's letters, and the water stilled and the temperature solved itself, and they crossed on dry stone. The chess chamber was enormous. The pieces were 6 feet tall. The board was the floor itself, black and white squares extending 30 feet in each direction, and the pieces stood in their opening positions and looked at the new arrivals with the flat-faced weight of things that are ready. Ron looked at the board for 10 full seconds. Nobody spoke. "White plays," he said. "We're black. The position's been opened, look, white's already moved, 2 pieces are displaced. Someone's played this board before." He walked to the edge of the black side and stood there with his head slightly tilted, seeing something in the geometry that nobody else was tracking yet. 7 moves. I can do it in 7 moves. He looked back at them. I need a knight position. Who plays? I'll be a bishop, Hermione said, immediately. You're the worst bishop shape of anyone here, Ron said, without criticism, just fact. Neville. Knight. You just have to move when I tell you. Neville looked at the 6-foot chess piece he was being assigned to. Right, he said. Harry, you're a castle. Stand there until move 5 and then go diagonally left on my signal. Ron was already on the board, moving to his assigned square, and the chess pieces moved aside for him with the respect of their own kind recognizing authority. Luna, can you be a pawn? I'm always a pawn until I reach the other end, Luna said serenely, stepping onto the board. That's exactly right, actually, Ron said. He looked at Daphne. Queen. Daphne looked at him for a beat. Then she stepped onto the board. What followed was 7 moves and 4 minutes and a white knight losing its head in a way that made Hermione make a sound of involuntary distress and a white bishop getting removed from the board so decisively that the pieces on both sides went still for a moment with what looked like respect. Ron called each move with the calm of someone who had looked at this board for 45 seconds and then solved it the way you solve simple arithmetic, not quickly, because it wasn't quick, but certainly, because the answer was never in question. Checkmate. The white king's crown fell. The pieces cleared. The door opened. Ron exhaled. He was grinning. Best game I've ever played, he said. And I wasn't even a player. He looked at Harry. You'd better tell me what's through there. I'll tell you everything when it's done, Harry said. Ron looked at him and something in his expression was the look of someone accepting a weight they've been asked to carry for a friend. All right, he said. I'll wait here. Neville, I'll wait too, Neville said, and he said it with such quiet certainty that Harry felt something warm move through him that had nothing to do with the bond. The 4 of them went through. The poisons room was Hermione's, and she walked to the bottles without being asked, reading the riddle written in flame on the parchment on the wall, and solved it in under 2 minutes. Not because it was easy but because she was Hermione Granger and logic puzzles under pressure were a different kind of easy for her, and she turned and handed Harry the correct vial without ceremony. The fire in front of them died. She drank the other and went back, and Harry felt her pulse recede slightly in the bond, the distance of the chamber between them, but steady and clear. Go, she said, from the fire side. We'll be here. 3 of them through the fire and 1 more chamber and then Harry knew, before the door opened, what was inside. The bond told him. The ancient magic told him. The stone told him, or rather the thing that lived in old objects that have been enchanted with genuine care for genuine purposes, a kind of ambient significance that the bond was now sensitive to. The room was empty except for the mirror. It was tall and ornate and it had words carved around the top. Erist stra eru oit uba kafru oit on wosi. Harry read it forward and then reversed it in his head and stood in front of it and looked into it. He had expected to see his parents. He had been told the mirror showed you what you most desired, and he had assumed that for him this would be James and Lily, standing behind him in the glass, whole and alive. What he saw was the 4 of them. Himself, slightly older, or maybe just more settled, standing with the ease of someone who has stopped bracing against anything. And Daphne on his left, and Hermione on his right, and Luna slightly in front with her face tipped up as though looking at something extraordinary in the sky above the mirror's frame. They were not doing anything dramatic. They were simply standing together, and the image had the quality of something that was not a desire but a certainty, not I want this but this is coming, this is already true, and the warmth of it was indistinguishable from the bond's warmth. He put his hand in his pocket and the stone was there. He held it in his hand and looked at it, small, red as old blood, warm in a way that stones don't tend to be. He could feel what it was, something very old, made with something that was almost love, the concentrated alchemical effort of a person who had decided to devote 6 centuries to understanding what life was and had succeeded more than they'd intended. He put it back in his pocket. He heard the door behind him. "You found it," Quirrell said. Harry turned around. Quirrell stood in the doorway, and the turban was still in place, and his face wore the anxious mild expression that had never been real for a single day, and Harry looked at him with the clear, settled attention of someone who has been expecting this and is not particularly alarmed by its arrival. "Yes," Harry said. "Give it to me." "No." Quirrell crossed the room in 3 steps, and his wand was out, and Harry felt the bond activate, not gradually, not building, but immediate and total, all at once, the full resonant structure of it hitting him like a wave from a warm sea. All 4 of them, even through walls and fire. The ancient magic under it, awake and fully present. The curse Quirrell fired was purple and fast and hit the shield that came up in front of Harry with a crack like a bat hitting stone, and the shield had not been consciously produced. Harry hadn't raised his wand, it had come from the bond directly, defensive and instantaneous, and it absorbed the curse with the ease of something very large absorbing something comparatively small. Quirrell stared at the shield. "That wasn't a spell," he said. "No," Harry agreed. The voice that came from Quirrell then was not Quirrell's voice. It came from the wrong direction, from the back of Quirrell's head, from behind the turban, a thin and terrible sound like something that has been reduced to its essentials and found them sufficient. "Potter," the voice said. "The famous Harry Potter. At last." Harry looked at Quirrell's face and saw the expression on it change, not Quirrell's expression but something using Quirrell's face, something that had been using it for months, and the thing using it was afraid. Not of Quirrell's situation. Afraid of Harry. Harry found this interesting. "You should give it to me," Voldemort said, still from the back of Quirrell's head, with the tone of something that has been patient for a long time and is running out of patience. "I am more than you know, boy. I am more than this situation." "You're less than you used to be," Harry said. "You're the back of someone else's head." The bond was extraordinary at that moment. Harry could feel all 3 of them through the walls, Hermione behind the fire, Daphne and Luna in the chamber beyond, all of them aware, all of them present, the 4-point constellation fully active and pouring through him with the warm, resonant certainty of something that has found its purpose. Quirrell moved. He was fast, faster than he'd seemed, the anxious professor persona dropping entirely, and he covered the distance and his hand closed around Harry's wrist. The sound Quirrell made was immediate and catastrophic. Harry felt the bond move into his skin. Not heat, exactly, or heat the way the sun is heat, not the way fire is, deep and cellular and true, and wherever Quirrell's hand touched him it moved outward from the contact point and Quirrell screamed. He let go. His hand was blistered. He stared at it and then at Harry with an expression that had gone past fear into something purely biological, the response of something that has touched an electric fence and is trying to understand why the fence is active. "The bond," Voldemort's voice said, from the back of Quirrell's head, and the fear in it now was a different quality, not tactical fear but the fear of something that recognizes an opposing force and understands that it is insufficient. A tri-witch soul bond. "I was told, I did not believe it," Harry said. He raised his wand. The spell he used was not from a textbook. He had not been taught it. It came from the same place the shield had come from the bond, from the ancient magic, from the accumulated weight of 2 years of connection and love and the particular kind of knowing that comes from being seen completely by people who chose to see you without obligation. It was not a dark spell and not exactly a light spell. It was simply very old, and it was specific. It moved toward the thing inside Quirrell, not Quirrell himself, and found it, and named it. The light was gold and deep red. The same colors as the column of light from Ollivander's. The same colors as his parents in Luna's description of the ministry portraits. It hit Quirrell in the chest, and the thing inside him, the fragment, the piece of a soul that had been reduced by its own choices to something that could only survive by inhabiting others, made a sound that the walls of the chamber absorbed and did not return, and it came loose. It pulled itself free of Quirrell with the specific violence of something that does not leave willingly, and it rose above them in the chamber as a shape that had no accurate description, darkness with intention. Nothing with a direction, and the bond hit it again, all 4 points at once, all 4 of them through the walls and the fire and the distance, concentrated through Harry and through the wand. The fragment of Voldemort's soul did not disperse. It did not merely weaken or retreat. It was unmade. Not destroyed in the way that matter is destroyed, reconstituted into other matter, preserved in transformation. Unmade. As though it had never had the right to be assembled in the first place, and the universe, given an adequate argument, agreed. The chamber went very quiet. Quirrell collapsed. He was alive, Harry checked, immediately and deliberately, because Quirrell was a person who had made terrible choices and was not therefore not a person, unconscious, his hands badly burned, but breathing with the shallow regularity of someone in shock rather than someone dying. The stone was still in Harry's pocket. Harry stood in the middle of the chamber and lowered his wand and felt the bond, all 3 pulses, distinct and immediate, flooding through him with the warmth of relief and the warmth of something else, something that had no one-word name, the feeling of 4 people having done something together that could not have been done separately. He heard the door. Daphne and Luna came through, Daphne first, with her wand still raised and her grey eyes going around the room in rapid professional assessment, and Luna right behind her with the expression of someone watching the end of something inevitable, calm as weather. "Voldemort?" Daphne said. "Gone," Harry said. "The fragment that was here. Unmade." Daphne looked at Quirrell on the floor. At Harry's wand, lowered but still faintly glowing. She said, "The bond did it." "We did it," Harry said. She looked at him. The silver-gray eyes went through something complex and landed somewhere he couldn't quite name, but that the bond recognized even if language didn't have a word ready for it. "Yes," she said. "We did." Luna knelt beside Quirrell and put 2 fingers to his neck to check his pulse and looked up. "He'll need a hospital. He wasn't fully himself for months. The fragment was in him like an infection." She stood. "He'll need care." "I'll make sure he gets it," Harry said. "How?" Daphne asked. "I'll tell Dumbledore," Harry said. "Now. Tonight." He met her eyes. "And I'll tell him on my terms, not his." She nodded. "Precise and certain. Good." Behind them, through the fire, Hermione's pulse in the bond did something rapid and brilliant, the way it always did when a problem had been solved and the solution was better than expected. Dumbledore arrived in the chamber 40 minutes later. Harry had sent Luna back through to tell Hermione that it was over, and then had gone up through the chambers and out into the corridor and found a suit of armor who seemed willing to deliver a message, which was his first real proof that the castle was doing things specifically for him, and the message was, "I have the stone and I need to see you. Now. Not morning, not scheduled. Now." Dumbledore came. He came alone, in the middle of the night, walking into the chamber with a quickness that his usual measured pace didn't suggest was available to him. He saw Quirrell on the ground. He saw Harry standing. He saw the stone in Harry's open palm. He did not speak immediately. He looked at everything in the room, the burns on the floor, the faint residual light in Harry's wand, the expression on Harry's face, and then he said, very quietly, "The fragment." Gone, Harry said. Unmade. Not dispersed. Unmade. Dumbledore was very still. In the chamber's low light, with the aftermath of the Bond's work still in the air, he looked older than he usually looked. Or perhaps more accurately, he looked the age he actually was. How, he said. The Bond, Harry said. All four of us. We came tonight because we chose to, not because we were supposed to. He held the stone out. This is for Flamel. Not for the Ministry, not for Hogwarts, not for anyone's strategic use. For Flamel. Yes, Dumbledore said. He took the stone with both hands and held it with the careful sadness of someone returning something borrowed. Harry. You owe me an explanation, Harry said. And I'll have it. Tomorrow morning. In your office, with tea, and you'll start from the beginning, from the night you left me at Privet Drive, and you won't manage what you tell me. He looked at the old man directly, the way he'd looked at him on the 3rd floor in October. I'm not asking permission. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The blue eyes, the intelligence in them, the guilt, and now something new, a kind of complicated, undefended relief. The relief of someone who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just been told, by someone capable of handling the weight, that they no longer have to. 8 o'clock, Dumbledore said. I'll have tea ready. Harry nodded. He turned and went back through the door. Behind him, he heard Dumbledore say, very quietly, to no one in particular, Lily, and then nothing else. He came back through all the chambers, the chess board with the scattered pieces, the poisons room, the water floor, the key room, the devil's snare corridor. He came out into the 3rd floor corridor and Hermione was there, and Luna, and Daphne, and Ron and Neville who had apparently not waited at all and had come to the corridor entrance when the time had stretched past reasonable. Hermione looked at him. Her expression was doing the thing where it had too much in it to resolve into any single readable emotion, so it stayed at a kind of vibrant, overwhelmed openness that was more honest than any specific reaction would have been. Done, she said. Done. Ron said, what was it? In there. Voldemort, Harry said. A piece of him. Possessing Quirrell. Ron stared. Then he said, right. Okay. And you? Unmade it, Harry said. Ron looked at him for a long, still moment. Then he looked at Daphne and Luna and Hermione, and back at Harry, and said, in a voice that was trying to be casual and not entirely managing, the four of you. Yes, Harry said. Ron nodded, slowly, the nod of someone filing something very large in a place where they can look at it later. Right, he said. I beat wizard chess. You unmade Voldemort. He paused. I feel like my contribution was adequate. Neville made the startled laugh sound. Then Harry did, and then Hermione, and then Luna, high and easy, and even Daphne's mouth moved into the real version of the almost smile, the one that had been building since August in a park in Little Whinging when she'd told him someone should have told you a long time ago. The bond was warm and full and resonant, all 4 points, and the castle around them held it the way stone holds heat, slowly, completely, for a long time. They walked back through the corridors together, 6 of them in the dark, and the castle let them pass. Every door they needed was already open. Chapter 6, What the Bond Remembers. The morning after the stone chamber, Harry slept until 6 and woke up the way he sometimes did after something large had passed, not groggy, not displaced, but precisely located, aware of exactly where he was and what had happened and what was coming. The bond was the same. All 3 pulses, steady and close. Hermione's already quick, which meant she was awake and thinking. Daphne's precise and measured. Luna's constant as tides. He dressed, went downstairs through a Gryffindor common room that was empty in the early morning, and walked to Dumbledore's office alone. The gargoyle was already stepped aside. The office was warm and full of the kind of accumulated presence that spaces develop when one person has spent decades thinking in them. Instruments on the shelves, silver and quietly spinning. Portraits of previous headmasters, some asleep, some watching with the alert interest of people who understand that interesting things happen in the early morning. Fawkes the Phoenix on his perch, who looked at Harry with one gold eye and made a sound like a question. Dumbledore was at his desk with the tea already made and 2 cups out. He stood when Harry came in, which Harry noted, and gestured to the chair across the desk, which Harry took. They looked at each other. "You said start from the beginning," Dumbledore said. He sat. He folded his hands on the desk and his expression had the quality it had shown last night in the chamber, undefended, older than its usual performance, the warmth still present but the management of it set aside. "The night I left you at Privet Drive." "Yes," Harry said. So Dumbledore talked. He talked for an hour and a half. He talked about Voldemort and the war and the prophecy. Harry filed the prophecy under things requiring immediate further investigation, and about the night in Godric's Hollow and the choice he had made afterward. He talked about the blood protection, Lily's sacrifice creating a charm that held while Harry lived with a blood relative who had taken him in, and how the charm required Petunia's acknowledgement, which was why he'd chosen her despite knowing, going in, what kind of household it was. He said knowing and choosing with the careful distinction of someone who has been sitting with a moral weight for a long time and is not attempting to put it down. He talked about his plan. He said plan without apology and without pride. He described the shape of it, Harry arriving at Hogwarts at 11, humble and curious rather than shaped by expectation, walking into the wizarding world without the weight of a decade of constructed narrative, meeting Voldemort's return under conditions Dumbledore had tried to control for. He stopped at a certain point in this description and looked at his hands. "I thought," he said, slowly, "that I was the most qualified person to make these choices. That my experience, my knowledge of dark magic and of Tom Riddle specifically, gave me a perspective that justified deciding what Harry Potter should be." He looked up. "I was wrong about that. I was right about the facts. I was wrong about who had the right to use them." Harry sat with this for a moment. Outside the window, the grounds were pale with early morning, the lake lying still and silver. "The bond changed the plan," Harry said. "The bond changed everything," Dumbledore said, and there was something in his voice that was not regret and not relief but somewhere between them, the feeling of watching a mathematical proof resolve itself through a different route than expected, arriving at a better answer. "I had not accounted for it. When I first became aware of it, the sorting, the charms class, the reports from Phileas, I spent several weeks determining whether it was a complication. And I determined that it was not a complication. It was a correction." He held Harry's gaze. "The plan I had for you required you to be largely alone. Formidable but isolated. The bond made that impossible, and the bond was right to make that impossible, and I should have understood from the beginning that a boy who had been isolated for 10 years did not need more isolation, he needed the opposite." He paused. "I am telling you this not to ask your forgiveness. You don't owe me that and I'm not requesting it. I'm telling you because you asked for the truth and this is part of it." Harry looked at the headmaster, at this extraordinary, complicated, genuinely well-meaning man who had managed the world like a chess-board for so long that he'd stopped being able to see the pieces as people. He thought about what Daphne had said on the train, neutrality is not the same as indifference. He thought about what the bond had told him in October standing in this corridor, not an enemy. "I appreciate the truth," Harry said. "What's the prophecy?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he told him. "Neither can live while the other survives." Harry listened to it. Turned it over. "You thought I'd need to die," he said. A silence with considerable weight in it. "I thought it was possible," Dumbledore said carefully, "that the fragment of Voldemort's soul that attached itself to you that night, which I became aware of, over time, from various sources of evidence, might need to be destroyed in a way that also," he stopped. "Yes. But it was unmade," Harry said. Last night. Without any of that. Yes. So the prophecy's constraint, neither can live while the other survives, was about the fragments. The pieces of his soul he'd made. As long as he was split that way, he couldn't be truly alive, and I couldn't be either, not fully, because one of those pieces was in me. Harry worked through it with the same methodical attention he'd been giving to Flitwick's precision exercises, taking the problem apart, finding its structure. Last night we unmade the piece in Quirrell. If there are others, Dumbledore said, and the weight in his voice was very old. I have been investigating for years. I believe there are several. Then we find them, Harry said. And we unmade them. The same way. The same way will require the bond, Harry said. Yes. Which means this doesn't happen on your timeline or Voldemort's. It happens on ours. He stood up. He was 11 years old and he was speaking to the most powerful wizard in Britain, and he was not performing confidence, he was simply stating the shape of things as he understood them, which was the only kind of certainty that had ever felt honest to him. I want everything you know about the remaining Horcruxes, that's what they are, aren't they? That's the term, by end of term. I want to start next year with the full picture. Dumbledore looked up at him. The blue eyes, and in them something that had moved past calculation and landed in something simpler and more important, trust. Not blind trust, not comfortable trust, but the kind that comes from watching someone demonstrate over and over that they will carry what they say they'll carry. You'll have it, Dumbledore said. Harry nodded. He looked at Fawkes, who was watching him still with that gold eye, and made the question sound again. Harry looked at the bird for a moment, and the bond gave him something that felt like the castle giving him a door, not information exactly, just the sense of something recognizing something. He held out his arm. Fawkes stepped onto it. Dumbledore watched this with an expression that would have been impossible to describe to someone who hadn't been watching the whole morning. He's never done that with a student, Dumbledore said. He's done it with one student now, Harry said, gently returning the phoenix to his perch. He turned to go. Harry. He stopped. Your father, Dumbledore said, would have been, he stopped. Started again. James would have found the whole thing very funny. The four of you. The bond. Last night. A pause. Your mother would have found it exactly right. Harry stood at the door. He felt the weight of those words find their place in his chest, just left of center, where they would stay. I know, he said. He went out. The Hogwarts Express was in 4 days. In those 4 days, several things happened in sequence and some simultaneously, and the castle watched all of it with the particular attention of somewhere that has decided something significant has occurred within its walls and is paying archival respect to the record. Quirrell was taken by Ministry healers on the morning after the chamber. Harry stood in the entrance hall and watched the stretcher go and felt something that was not sympathy exactly but was adjacent to it, the awareness that a person's life had been consumed by something they'd had limited power to resist, and that the aftermath required care rather than judgment. He said this to Hermione, who said she agreed but was going to struggle with the being tried to kill us aspect for some time, which Harry thought was entirely fair. Hermione spent 2 days writing the most comprehensive account of the Tri-Witch Soul Bond event that had ever been recorded, filling a new notebook from cover to cover, and at the end of it she put it in an envelope and addressed it to the Department of Mysteries with a covering letter that began, I am 11 years old and I believe this is the most important magical document produced in Britain in the last century, and I would appreciate your acknowledgement of receipt. She sealed it and sent it and then looked slightly stunned at herself and then looked defiant, which was more characteristic. Luna went to the Hogwarts library and returned 3 books she'd borrowed in September, checked out 4 new ones, and left a note for the Ravenclaw first year who had been unkind about her cork necklace that said, simply, the necklace is for Nargles. You are welcome. She seemed satisfied with this resolution. Neville received a letter from his grandmother on the 3rd day that was, by his account, the first letter she had ever sent that contained the word proud in reference to him rather than in reference to someone he should be more like. He read it at breakfast, alone first, and then found Harry in the corridor and showed it to him without saying anything, and Harry read it and said, "She's right," and Neville folded it back up with the careful movements of someone storing something valuable. Ron spent most of the 4 days playing chess against himself and winning both sides, which he found intellectually stimulating but socially inadequate, and therefore found anyone who would play him, and won every game, and seemed largely content. The summons from the Wizengamot arrived on the second day. It was addressed to Harry James Potter and it arrived by Ministry Owl, formal purple, landing on the Gryffindor table at breakfast with the officious weight of official correspondence. Harry opened it and read it and passed it to Hermione, who read it and said, "They convened an emergency session," with the tone of someone who has been anticipating this but is still mildly annoyed by the timing. The letter informed him that the Wizengamot's Committee on Extraordinary Magical Occurrences had convened to discuss the matter of the Triwitch Soul Bond event of 1991 and required his attendance at a preliminary hearing at the Ministry of Magic on the 27th of June, the week after term ended. It was signed by the head of the committee, whose name Harry didn't recognize, and countersigned by the senior undersecretary, whose name he did, Lucius Malfoy. He passed it to Daphne at dinner that evening. She read it twice, in the focused way she read things she was going to need to respond to. She set it down. "Malfoy," she said. "He's been watching since September," Harry said. "He had Draco watching from Slytherin. Reporting." "I know. Draco doesn't try very hard to be subtle." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that cost her something. You could hear the cost in the precise way she kept her voice level. "My father has been writing to the Malfoys." Harry looked at her. "He wants to know which side is advantageous," she said. "He always wants to know which side is advantageous. He's been watching the bond the same way Lucius has, as a variable that might be harnessed or might be a threat, depending." She met Harry's eyes. "I want you to know that I told him, in March, that I was not going to be a variable in his calculations and that if he attempted to use the Greengrass name against the interests of anyone I considered my own, I would remove the Greengrass name from the equation by a method he would find unpleasant." "What method?" Harry asked. "I didn't specify. Specificity limits options." The corner of her mouth moved. Harry looked at her for a long moment and felt the bond carry something between them that was too specific and too warm to fit the word friendship comfortably, but for which he didn't yet have better language, and he thought, "There's time for that." "The hearing," he said. "What does Lucius want from it?" "Several possible things," Daphne said, back in her crisp assessment mode. 1. Establish ministry oversight of the bond. Regulations, monitoring, reporting requirements. Containment through bureaucracy. 2. Establish that the bond constitutes a class of magical event requiring guardian approval, which would give your guardians, meaning Dumbledore, effectively, since the Dursleys have no standing, control over how the bond develops. 3. She stopped. 3. Harry said. 3. Attempt to legally sever or disrupt the bond under the premise that it was formed without proper consent from the minor parties involved. The table was quiet. "He can't do that," Hermione said, from across the table, where she'd been listening with her quill arrested mid-note. "The bond is not a constructed enchantment. Flitwick confirmed it can't be severed by external action. Lucius Malfoy does not require his legal arguments to be accurate," Daphne said. "He requires them to be presented in a forum where he has sufficient influence to make accuracy optional. Then we need to be in that forum before he makes his case," Harry said. "We are 11, Hermione said. "I have a Wizengamot seat," Harry said. "Unoccupied for 9 years. I sit in that seat at the hearing and I speak for myself and the bond can't be touched because I'm the focal point and you cannot regulate something that lives inside a person." He looked at Hermione. "That's the argument. Right?" She was quiet for 3 seconds, running it through. "Yes," she said. "That's the argument. It's good. It's actually very good." She was already writing. "I'll need formal robes," Harry said. The Potter family seal, if there is one. There's probably one. He looked at Daphne. There's one, she said. I have the heraldic records. Owl rings, traditionally, for Wisengamot attendants. I'll write to Gringotts tonight, there'll be one in your vault. She said this with the brisk efficiency of someone who has moved from threat to response without stopping to be alarmed by the gap, which Harry thought was her best quality. Can we attend? Hermione asked. The three of us. As parties to the bond. The bond's parties have standing in any proceeding concerning the bond, Daphne said. It's in the 1847 Charter of Magical Rights. Anyone who tries to argue otherwise is arguing against the Charter, which puts the entire legitimacy of the committee in question. She paused. Which is, incidentally, a position I would enjoy watching Lucius Malfoy try to hold. Luna, who had been listening with her chin in her hand and her pale eyes moving between them, said, "We should bring Flitwick." They looked at her. "He's been documenting the bond since September," Luna said. "He has 40 years of expertise and he finds us extraordinary. Having an expert who finds you extraordinary is politically useful." She looked at Harry. "Also he has good cups. Committees respond well to people who own good cups." Harry looked at her. "Luna," he said, "that's excellent strategy." She looked pleased. Flitwick agreed immediately and with visible delight. He brought out the documentation he'd been keeping since September, 12 inches of dense parchment, annotated in a hand so small it required a magnifying glass, with theoretical frameworks and practical measurements and 3 separate sections titled with variations on unprecedented, and spent an evening going through it with Harry and Hermione and marking the sections that were most relevant to a legal argument about the bond's nature and inviolability. "The critical point," he said, spreading his parchment across his desk, "is that a spontaneous try-witch soul bond is not a performed magical act. It is a recognition of pre-existing conditions. The magic that produced it was always there, in each of you. The kiss was not a spell. It was a trigger, like a key finding a lock that was already built." He looked at them. "You cannot legislate a key for being a key." Hermione wrote this down verbatim. "May I quote you?" she said. "I insist," said Flitwick. On the last evening before the train, Harry went to the Gryffindor common room late and found it empty except for the fire and the portraits and the particular quality of a room at the end of its year, everything slightly used, slightly known, the chairs finding their shapes after 9 months of people sitting in them. He sat in the chair nearest the fire and let the bond run full. All 3 of them were awake. He could feel it. Hermione's pulse had its late-night rapid quality, notes writing or reading, probably both. Daphne's was the measured pace of someone working through a problem with the lights still on. Luna's was constant as it always was, unaffected by time of day or circumstance. He thought about the year. He thought about all of it, the park and the roundabout and the world exhaling, 2 years of letters in a cupboard, Diagon Alley with borrowed sunshine and good ice cream, the sorting and Flitwick's good cups and the alcove on Tuesday evenings. The troll and quirrell and the chamber and the moment the gold light had hit the stone chamber floor and unmade something that had needed unmade. He thought about Dumbledore's office and your mother would have found it exactly right. He thought about Neville's grandmother's letter, folded with care. Ron saying I feel like my contribution was adequate with that terrible straight face. Hermione's covering letter to the Department of Mysteries, 11 years old and absolutely certain she was sending them the most important document of the century. He thought, I am 11 years old and I am happy. Not the shallow happy of something going well temporarily. The deep happy of someone who has found the ground under their feet after a long time of not knowing if it was there. The Bond's kind of happy, four-pointed, resonant, built to last. The portrait of a previous headmistress above the mantelpiece opened one eye and looked at him and said, in a drowsy voice, "Still awake, young man?" "Few more minutes," Harry said. She made a sound of tolerant approval and closed her eye. The train home was different from the train here. It was the same train, red and enormous, steam-clouded on platform 9 3/4, but the direction had changed, and the people on it had changed along with the direction. They were not the same as September, any of them, and Harry thought that was probably the most significant thing he could say about a year. They found the same compartment as before, which was either coincidence or the train's version of the castle's open doors. Harry thought it was the latter. Ron and Neville came too, which made the compartment full in the warm crowded way of a space that has the right number of people in it. Ron looked at Daphne, when they were all settled, with the expression of someone who has been wanting to ask something for weeks and is now calculating whether the journey gives him enough time to receive a full answer. "What's it like," he said, "being bonded to this one?" He gestured at Harry. "Informative," Daphne said, without looking up from her book. "Informative?" "He thinks in straight lines. Most people's thinking curves around things. His goes through them." She turned a page. "It's informative." Ron looked at Harry. "Is that a compliment?" "From Daphne it's a significant compliment," Luna said, looking out the window, watching London give way to countryside. Daphne did not confirm this. She turned another page. Hermione had her notebook on her lap, not writing in it, just holding it, which meant she was thinking rather than documenting, which was its own kind of rest for her. She was watching the countryside go past with the expression of someone reviewing a year's worth of material and finding it mostly satisfactory with some clear areas for improvement, which was exactly what she was doing. "Next year," she said, into the compartment. "Horcruxes," Harry said. "We need to know how many, where they are, and the order in which to address them. Dumbledore has information. We need to get it out of him completely and on a timeline we control, not one he controls. His timeline and ours tend to align when we make ours clear first," Harry said. Daphne said, without looking up, "Chamber of Secrets will likely be relevant." Everyone looked at her. "The diary," she said. "There's a story in the Greengrass family records, 1942, Hogwarts, a chamber, a monster. It was covered up at the time but the records note a Riddle connection." She looked up now, at Harry. "Tom Riddle. Voldemort's real name. He was a student here in 1942. Hermione was writing. He left something here," Daphne said. "Something with part of himself in it. The chamber. Next year, if he's reforming, if the remaining pieces of his soul are looking for activation, the diary will be the first one he tries to move through." "How do you know this?" Ron asked. "I pay attention to old records," Daphne said, with the tone of someone for whom this requires no further explanation. "She's always right about this sort of thing," Luna said. "She is," Harry said. He looked at Daphne, who met his eyes with the silver-gray directness she always brought, unhurried, certain. "We'll be ready." "We're always ready," she said. "We just don't always know what for in advance." She went back to her book. "That's what next year is for." The hearing was on the 27th. They arrived at the Ministry of Magic in formal robes, Harry in deep blue with the Potter family seal at the collar, a simple silver ring on his right hand that had come from the Gringotts vault along with a note in old handwriting that said for the Wisengamot, "James, when you're old enough," which he had folded and kept, and Hermione with her notebook and the carefully prepared legal citations, and Daphne with her annotated copy of the 1847 Charter and 3 separate scrolls of supporting argument, and Luna with her cork necklace and Flitwick walking beside them with 12 inches of documentation and the cheerful composure of someone who finds bureaucratic combat invigorating. The Wisengamot chamber was everything the books described and more, circular, tiered, purple-robed witches and wizards arranged in the curved rows, the gold of the Wisengamot seal on every surface. It smelled like old parchment and the particular staleness of a space where important things have been said for centuries, some of them true. Harry walked in and found the Potter seat, 9th from the left in the second tier, brass nameplate, 11 years of dust, and walked to it and sat in it. He heard the murmur in the room. He did not adjust his posture or his expression. He looked at the chamber from the Potter's seat with the clear, settled attention of someone who has come to have a conversation and is comfortable with the terms. Lucius Malfoy was on the committee panel, second from the end, his white blonde hair and expensive robes arranged with the precision of a man who understands that appearance is a form of argument. He looked at Harry across the chamber and his face performed gracious welcome and his eyes did not. Harry looked back. The committee chair opened proceedings and outlined the three concerns the committee had been convened to address. They were, as Daphne had predicted, exactly the three concerns she had named at the dinner table. Harry waited. Lucius went first, because he was second from the end and the committee used reverse order, and because Lucius was always the architect of the frame before anyone else could set one. He spoke for 12 minutes about the unprecedented nature of a spontaneous tri-witch soul bond, the absence of guardian consent, the potential for the bond's influence to affect the magical development of 4 minors in ways that could not be monitored or controlled, and the committee's responsibility to protect those minors by establishing regulatory oversight. His voice was smooth and well-modulated and entirely wrong about almost everything. Harry waited until it was finished and then raised his hand, and the chair, who had been watching Harry with the focused attention of someone who has read enough history to know what the Potter seat means in this room, acknowledged him. Harry stood. "The bond is not a constructed enchantment," he said, and his voice in the chamber was the voice of the chamber's acoustics doing what they were designed to do, carrying the speaker's words evenly to every tier. "It is not a performed magical act and not a contracted magical agreement. It is a recognition of pre-existing conditions by ancient magic that predates this institution by approximately 9 centuries. He paused. He looked at the committee panel. Regulating it would be equivalent to passing legislation on the color of the sky. The sky will note your legislation and continue. Several purple-robed witches and wizards in the upper tier made sounds. The argument that guardian consent was required assumes that the bond was something done to us, Harry said. It was not. We were 11 years old in a park in Surrey and the magic that had been between us since before we understood what magic was found its configuration. You cannot consent to gravity. You can only recognize it. He looked at Lucius Malfoy. I occupy this seat because the Potter family has held it for 4 generations and because I have the right by charter and blood. I am here to tell this committee that the bond is not subject to its jurisdiction, that any attempt to assert jurisdiction will be contested on the grounds of the 1847 Charter, and that the 4 parties to the bond are doing exceptionally well and do not require protection from the people who already protect them. Silence. Flitwick rose, called to speak, and delivered in 8 precise minutes the most elegant demolition of every one of Lucius Malfoy's 3 positions that Harry had ever heard, using language that was simultaneously accessible and unassailable, and ending with the key-finding a lock metaphor that landed in the chamber like the thing it was. A completely true statement that made the preceding 12 minutes of Lucius's speech sound like a description of weather as a criminal act. Hermione submitted her citations through the formal process, 7 pages of them, which the committee clerk received with the expression of someone who had not expected to be doing this much reading today. Daphne did not speak. She had submitted her scrolls in advance, through proper channels, 2 days ago, because Daphne operated in the places before the meeting rather than during it, and the 3 scrolls she'd submitted had apparently circulated among the committee members already, because 3 of them were looking at their copies rather than at the proceedings, which meant they already had their conclusions and were waiting for the form of things to catch up. Luna sat beside Harry throughout and radiated the serene confidence of someone who already knows how the vote goes. The vote went 7-2 for dismissal of the committee's concerns. Lucius Malfoy's face performed equanimity. His eyes did not. Harry stood as the session closed and looked across the chamber at him. Not as a provocation. Just as an acknowledgement, I see you and you see me and we both know what this was and where it ends, and I'm not afraid of where it ends. Lucius looked back at him for 3 full seconds. Then he turned to speak to the wizard beside him, and the subject was something else entirely, and Harry filed that as, not done, but moved to another theater. He could wait. Outside the ministry, in the June afternoon, the four of them stood on the pavement and the city moved around them with its usual indifferent enormity, and Flitwick said his goodbyes with the warm briskness of a man who has enjoyed the morning thoroughly and has tea to get back to, and shook their hands in turn, and Harry's hand last, holding it a moment longer. "Exceptional year," Flitwick said, with the weight of someone who has spent 40 years in magical education and is not using the word casually. "We're just getting started," Harry said. Flitwick smiled and went, and they were four on the pavement. Hermione was already summarizing the session in her notebook. 7-2 is a stronger margin than I projected, she said. The charter argument was the key move. If we hadn't established the 1847 precedent in advance through Daphne's submissions, we'd have been arguing from a weaker position and, Hermione, Harry said. She looked up. We won, he said. Just for a moment. She looked at him. The brown eyes, warm and direct. She closed the notebook. We won, she said. Luna was looking at the sky above the ministry buildings with the expression she got when she was seeing something other people weren't, which Harry had learned generally meant she was accurate about something that hadn't happened yet. He won't stop, she said, of Malfoy, without concern. No, Daphne said. He won't. But he'll slow down, Luna said. He's recalculating. He'll try something different next time, somewhere we haven't prepared for. Then we prepare more broadly, Harry said. Luna looked at him. Do you know what I like best about the bond? She said. What? It doesn't know fear of the future, she said. It only knows the present, and in the present it knows us, and when it knows us it's confident. She turned her face from the sky to Harry, and her pale eyes had the quality they sometimes had of seeing something in him specifically that she found entirely right. That's not nothing. No, Harry said. It's not. Daphne was standing slightly apart, looking at the ministry building with the thoughtful distance of someone identifying structural weaknesses from the outside. She said, without turning, Lucius has been gathering information since September. On all four of us. He has files. She turned. I know because my father has been sending him things, and I know what my father knows. She looked at Harry. I want you to know that I have been keeping my own files. On him. Since December. Harry looked at her. What kind of files? The kind that explain why Lucius Malfoy claimed Imperius so convincingly at the end of the war despite having been photographed at 3 separate dark revels in the preceding years. She said it with complete composure. The kind with copies held in 3 separate locations, none of them accessible to the Malfoy family or the ministry. Ron would have said brilliant. Hermione would have said incredibly useful. Luna would have smiled. Harry said, of course you do. And Daphne looked at him with those silver-gray eyes, and the corner of her mouth moved into the real version of the smile, the one that had been building since a park in Little Whinging, since she'd sat on a roundabout across from a boy with a split lip and a pound coin and told him someone should have told you a long time ago, and kissed him on the cheek, and felt the world shift under her feet and stood firm in it. She didn't need to say anything. The bond said it. He felt it, all 3 of them at once, the precise metronome and the deep tide and the rapid layers, warm and full and resonant, the 4-point constellation in the June sunshine outside the Ministry of Magic, 11 years old and unafraid of anything the future was building toward them. Platform 9 3/4 again in September, Hermione said, closing her notebook with a definitive click. September, Harry said. I'll have the Horcrux research ready, Hermione said. I'll have Lucius's files in order, Daphne said. I'll bring shortbread, Luna said. They looked at her. It's a long train ride, she said. Harry laughed, easy and real and entirely his, and the bond carried it outward through all 4 of them the way it carried everything, the way it had always carried everything, the way it would carry everything to come, not because it had to, not because it was constructed to, but because 4 people had sat in a park on a gray October morning and the ancient magic of the world had looked at them and found them worth keeping. The city moved around them. The bond held.